Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to April's PDP, where we're going to discuss all things wildland. Grant Russell, Battalion 9 C Shift, and we hope to make this as entertaining or interesting and interactive as possible. So thank you to Jason Cahill and Joe Aldrich for trying to work out the kinks on our tech side to make that possible today.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Ed Henderson, 111B Shift. And thank you guys all for coming out. Hopefully we can, talk about some stuff that we either forgot or kind of refresh some stuff or even learn some stuff today. So thanks for being here.
Hey, everybody. Chief Jenkins, AC, our shift commander for C Shift, and talk wildland and everything wildland today.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started, and we'll just have try and get you guys as involved as possible. We want to have some good open discussion, hear some differing points of view, and talk about tactics and strategy when it comes to wildland. So if we can get that first picture up. Okay, so we're just going to start off with this picture right here. I know it's only a two-dimensional picture, but what do you see? What in this picture, you're the first arriving company officer, and you see this picture, you're pulling up to this, what are your thoughts? What are you thinking? What are your priorities? And what are your initial actions?
So from a company officer standpoint, based upon that picture, I see a fire burning away from the structures in the background. It's not super clear what's out in front of it from the picture provided, but it does look like it's burning sort of at a 45 to that road. Fire activity doesn't look too intense. So at that point, I would probably just take that flank, anchor real well off the road, take the flank on the left side of the picture, anchor real well off the road so that the fire doesn't get behind me, and start a mobile attack after I got through the fence along that, I guess what we'll call the head of the fire. Now, if the fire intensity was if it was more intense fire, what I would probably do is try to hold that road and make sure it didn't jump to the other side. And then when we got a chance or when we got more resources in, then we would go ahead and try to make a direct attack on it.
So I think one of the things to add on that too, when we deal with CAL FIRE a lot up there, and I'm going to talk about Rancho Marietta, when we've had fires near the golf course. And one of the things you saw in that picture there was a good roadway, and that's going to hold most of your fires. And up in Rancho Marietta, when you give a size up, it might be, hey, we've got a vegetation fire, 1 acre, potential of 3 acres, surrounded by, parking lot on one side, roads. Basically, it's contained is the information. That really helps CAL FIRE whether they're going to launch aircraft or not. So a little addition to that type of thing. But sure. I agree with you. Flame links don't look too bad. Column is kind of going straight up. Looks like it's probably just a slow burn. And is that a fence line behind it with some houses back there? Is that what we're kind of seeing? Kind of off the road. So that should be a pretty simple, left flank, right flank, surround. Engine company gets there and starts either mobiling or progressive hosely if it's soft dirt.
Yeah, I agree with you, Chief. I think that the size up, the initial size up from the first incoming company officers totally sets the tone on this fire right here.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's go ahead and let's get going with the discussion, the presentation, and hopefully we'll get some more people to start participating. Okay, so we're just going to review some just quick basic layout of a wildland fire. Everybody should know this. We've been hitting our S130, our RT130, S190 refreshers for the year, and everybody should be getting into that wildland mindset. We're starting to have vegetation fires. We've had a couple in the last few days, and even have had a couple fires that we've had to go back and deal with over 2 to 3 days. So it's only April. That should be something that you're starting to think about in the back of your mind, that the grass is still green and we're already starting to burn. So we're in that transition phase right now with our fuels. Our fuels are starting to dry out. We're going to get a little pause in that this coming week as we get some rain and some precipitation over the weekend. So that's going to slow that down for a couple days. But usually this time of year, those rain events are followed by north wind events. So it's kind of a cyclical thing. We get the moisture, and then a couple days later it dries out, and the vegetation continues to dry out and go forward. Next slide.
Also grows too. If we could jump on that real up, looks like you're going to hit
No,
it.
we can go back.
No, he's going to hit it in the next slide. No, I was just going to bring up the spot fire issue, but they'll talk about that. So go ahead and move to the next slide.
So just some cleanup of some terminology. So some terms that tend to get used interchangeably, but actually from a command and control standpoint mean two completely different things, are slopovers and spot fires. Slopovers are breakouts right along the control line that often create fingers, and spot fires are fires that are across the line and actually are a separate fire that can be a safety issue to firefighters, caused by embers, rolling debris, and firefighters working the lines can find themselves caught between two flanks of fire because of a spot fire. So two totally different things, a slop over versus a spot fire.
So to add on that, one of the things we hear quite a bit is people will arrive and say, I'm on scene, we have a spot fire out in the field, or a 10 by 10 spot fire, and that's not the case. When you use the word spot fire, it is a fire outside of the main fire. So especially with CAL FIRE, when you arrive and you say spot fire, that usually will describe your fire behavior, what's happening with the fire if you have spotting, and that can also alert them to dispatch other resources and even start air assignments. So remember, the main body of fire, even if it's a roadside fire, it's just that's your fire. If it's a 10 by 10, it's a fire. When you use spot and there's no other fire, that's not the right terminology. So try to just remember to keep it as a fire, and a spot fire is anything outside of the main fire.
All right, so the fire behavior rules of thumb, the rate of spread changes with the wind, slope, and relative humidity. And I would add to that and also say the time of day. Whatever slope around here, it's typically flat. When that comes into alignment, that's going to be the hottest part of the day, and you're typically going to see the most rapid fire spread. So around here, it would probably be somewhere between noon and 2. And then the hottest part of the day, obviously, later on in the day, will create some increased fire behavior too.
So a peak burning period is always between 10 and 1800. You know, that's the fuels have had a chance to heat up as they come into the sun. The air slowly dries out, and that's when we're going to see our most intense fire behavior. And then from 1800 to 0400, as the fuels are no longer in the direct heat and sun, the RH starts to improve, then the fuels cool and become less receptive to active fire. That's not to say that under the right conditions, you can't have significant intense fire behavior in the middle of the night. It does happen from time to time. And then the best opportunity for control is usually 04 to 6 in the morning. That's when the temperatures are at their lowest, the humidity is at its highest, but that's a real short window. That's mostly for your campaign style fires. And then the whole process starts all over again as the sun comes up and the fuels start to heat up and the cycle repeats itself. Okay, we're going to talk size up, and this is something for company officers. You're the first arriving company officer. So size up, it's an ongoing process evaluating our current and expected fire conditions, and it begins before the incident begins, and it continues throughout the incident. So size up really begins. You know, what's our weather forecast? What are our weather conditions looking at? What time of year is it? What are our fuel conditions? And what's been happening lately? So when we talk about pre-incident plans prior to dispatch, that is knowing your first in area. And you know, when you want to know your first in area for wildland, what are your access points? What are your problem areas? What are some access issues you have in your first in area? We talk about the weather. You know, this time of year, the National Weather Service starts putting out 2 specific fire weather forecasts a day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. We don't pay too much attention to fire danger indices here at Metro. That's what CAL FIRE and the Forest Service use to forecast their dispatch levels for the day, and they change throughout the day as the indices change. Know your local terrain and fuels. So someone up in the Rio Linda area is going to have different terrain and fuels than, say, Station 31 that has significant topography, heavier fuels, and a lot more of a structural interface along the north bank of the American River. What's our fire behavior? So are we under a wind event? Just something to think about. And what are our resources available? What does our operations calendar look like for that day? Do we have a bunch of drills going on and that we may have some resource deficiencies in the afternoon during the peak burning periods, that's something to keep in the back of your mind and think about as the day goes on.
Yeah, and piggyback on that, I think a big one is the water tenders. We're fairly limited on water tenders and how far they're coming to get to your fire. You can really help your BC out a lot by being aware of that kind of stuff and kind of coming up on the radio and telling them, hey, you might want to think about ordering a couple more water tenders.
So to dovetail on all that stuff too, I think currently the old adage of what's your current fire behavior and what's your expected fire behavior. So we're already starting to see some fires burn. We had Aerojet the other day burn 4 acres, I think, on one of the remaining shifts through the tailings. There was duff within the rocks, and they just closed it out. So burned for quite a few days, took out another, I believe, 6 acres. I think a total was about 10 acres. Chief Russell had one in January, right after a rain, 20 acres through a vernal pool. So when we talk about current and expected, if what we're seeing currently probably is going to happen the next day or so. But when we also talk about weather, start watching the weather, start looking at humidity, start looking at the wind, the fuel moistures and all that. That can help determine your preparedness level for a response. You go from 1 to 2 acres, the next thing you know, somebody arrives and says, hey, potential of 500. That should kind of, well, wait a minute, where did that come from, right? We should have some 20, 30 acre fires prior to that 500 acre fire. Not to say it can't happen, but we just want to make sure our size ups were going. The other part with the size up I'll share from an assistant chief standpoint, and I'm going to relate back to a structure fire, is when a chief officer arrives, he's one guy. And so what he sees in the plan he may put into action, if you see something as a captain out in the field or something that changes, you need to communicate that because that can change the plan. So don't get, even from an assistant chief or a battalion chief coming in and saying, hey, here's our size up, here's our plan of action. If there's something that's not in alignment, or for an example, I'll take a structure fire. If we're defensive operation and next thing the fire kind of comes under control, we have a better look and maybe we can do vertical vent, go offensive on the living quarters, we need to voice that. And that would be, hey, recommendation, can we do that? And then the IC can now say, hey, I'm going to go from defensive to offensive here, or vice versa. So same thing in the wildland arena. If we're doing a direct firing and conditions change to where, hey, this is really dangerous to go direct, maybe we need to go to indirect. And as part of that, having that open feedback, open size up.
So just continuing with our size up in route. So what's our smoke column doing? So we've hit sizing up your smoke on structure fires pretty heavily recently and reading smoke. Same thing goes for wildland. What's the volume of our smoke? What's the color of it? What's the movement of it? Is our column going straight up? Is our column a white, lazy column? Or do we have an angry, dark column that is bent over? Is our smoke column going up, 200 feet and then being sheared off? What does that tell us? The direction of our smoke column gives us an idea of how aggressive that fire is moving. It gives you an idea of what that rate of spread is going to be before you even get on scene. What time of day is it? Are we going to a fire at 3 o'clock in the morning versus 3 o'clock in the afternoon? What's our weather? What's our temperature, our wind, our humidity? Clouds. What are our clouds doing? What kind of clouds do we have? Do we have any clouds? Do we have, which means that the fuels are going to be under direct sunlight. They're going to be hot and very receptive to carrying fire. And finally, we're going to hit this multiple times throughout this is access. What's our access to this? Do we know, are we going to have an easy time making access, or is it going to be the first engine arrives on scene and they're challenged trying to find the access to this fire in the first place? And what's our communications? So communications, you're responding in B7 to a fire down in the river versus you're in Battalion 5 or even Battalion 14 and you're responding out on the county line, where now you have communications on the VHF between two different dispatch centers. So you have Grass Valley for Battalion 5 and Camino for Battalion 14 in the areas that are either SRA or under Placer County Fire in Battalion 5. So it's incumbent to know your comm plans for your surrounding areas before you even roll out on that fire. The time to be learning the dispatch frequencies for Grass Valley and Camino are not on your way to the call. They need to happen now before the call is even dispatched and before fire season kicks into full gear.
I think to jump on that a little bit too, where you talked about your size up in the weather. Part of your size up too is when you get dispatched, what's being dispatched? Is it a type 1 and a type 3 or a pump and roll? Is that the terminology we want to use? Is it 4 pump and rolls, 1 water tender, dozer in the copter? That's good situational awareness. Now, when you do look at the column and you look at the size of the column, the smoke, the color, how the column's going up or down, this is where you'll hear of getting ahead of the call or getting ahead of the fire. So if you're responding with a type 1 and a pump and roll engine, and you see a well-established column that is going up and getting sheared off, heading that direction, that's where you need to order additional resources en route and get them on the road early to get ahead of that. So just got to keep some of that stuff in mind with ongoing size up and weather, resource allocation, all that.
I'd like to add something to that. Some of your best access points be told by the helicopter. Those guys are great eyes in the sky, and sometimes even if they're not dropping water for you and actively fighting fire, the best thing that they can do is provide SA for you and also your access points. And just be aware that depending on the area you're working, whether it's B14 or B5, some of the outlying areas in B5, that you are going to be switching over your communications to the CAL FIRE TAC. So if you can't get a hold of somebody, that's probably because you're supposed to be on the other TAC or they're in the process of transitioning. I would imagine that Chief Jenkins could go on for a couple hours on that topic.
So just to kind of build upon what Ed just said, we did last year's PDP on communications in the SRA, and Chief Jenkins talked about establishing incident priorities and building the box. Those PDPs are still available, and Captain Aldrich from trainings will make those available to you. They were recorded, and they can be pushed out so people can reference them for this year. So we're not going to hit too much on communication specifics. Okay, you're the first arriving company. So some questions to ask yourself as you arrive is, number one, what is the most important work to be done first? So am I going to be more effective building an anchor point and starting to anchor and flank the fire? Or is this something that is going to go several hundred acres, and maybe the most important work to be done right now is to establish access points to the fire and establish the command structure and establish incident priorities? Where can the most effective work be done? So at some point, we are going to need to build an anchor point for just about every single fire, and every fire is eventually going to need to be anchored and flanked. We'll get a little more into specifics on tactics coming up. And the answers come from a good size up. So if you have a head headed towards structures, are you going to go establish structure defense, or are you going to go try and catch the head before it gets to structures, because the most effective structure defense is perimeter control? But just some more questions to ask yourself, and that comes from your size up as you arrive. Thanks.
Yeah, and Grant, I don't think it's any different than what we think of a structure fire. I mean, our priorities are still the same, regardless of whether it's a structure fire or a wildland fire, something like that. So, when you get there, is there a life threat? Is there a property threat? And if there's not, then okay, where can we start thinking about stopping this thing? And what kind of resources are we going to need to get in here to do that? So start thinking about that when you first arrive. That first in company officer can really help command.
So to jump on that too, we had a fire back, I think it was about 2008, and one of the first new company officer actually took command of that fire. Part of that, when we talk about taking command or going and or taking a flank, anchoring and flanking, you may have to do both. This situation, the captain stayed back and he put out a Proby firefighter and a Proby engineer out into the field. And when we had Captain Egeman got burned over, we actually thought that other engine was going to get caught or get burned over. They got stuck out in the field and all that. So as a captain, you got a lot on your plate. You have to be thinking about your crew. Can I put them out there? Maybe in that case, maybe he should have stayed with his crew and actually went out and went direct, or kept his crew with him. So you have a lot of challenges. We're not going to tell you what to do or what the priority is. You have to assess that when you get on scene, whether you're going to go direct. But getting back to the basics, I think in most cases, we need to anchor and flank perimeter control, and don't get too far ahead of a lot of the stuff we do. But if we keep with that, anchoring and flanking perimeter control, that'll work on 90% of most of our fires.
Okay, so just continuing upon the size up, no different than structure fires. As you arrive on scene, what do we have burning in front of us? You know, do our tactics and strategies change residential structure versus commercial strip mall? What's our fire behavior? What's our rate of spread? What's the size of fire? What are the fuels? And exposures. So we talk about exposures. Most people just think exposures are primarily structures, houses, but we also have infrastructure. And one of the big things that we have that we don't talk too much about is you have a grass fire in a field with a lot of livestock in there. So now you actually have a life priority, but it's a different life priority than what we're thinking of, is that you have livestock that is someone's livelihood out there. So that needs to be something that plays into your decision-making process as how can we mitigate the threat to livestock? And it's something to think about as part of our size up. And what's our topography? So primarily our topography is flat, except along the river. And as you start to get towards the eastern part of our district out towards Rancho Murrieta, you start to get a little more of a topographical influence. And we can't hit this point enough. What's our access to the fire? Do we have limited access? Do we have unlimited access? Do we have good? And then initial safety zones and escape routes. And just any special hazards you see, snags, burning trees, wires, hazmat. So out in certain areas where you have a fire that's pretty much moving through backyards and you get the occasional junkyard fire, think about hazmat. What's our point of initial attack? Are we able to establish an anchor point? And what resources are needed? So do we need additional engines, aircraft? And the biggest thing, what's our lag time for additional alarms? So as you order additional resources, the more you order, the longer it's going to take for them to get there.
So to jump on that too, when we respond to the wildland incident, we need to ask ourselves what started the fire. You got the wires down out there. We do have Station 58 named after Kim Bowling, went out into a field to fight a fire and actually stepped on a power line. Quite about 25 years ago, there was a fire out in a field and a farmer went out there with, looking for his horse. His horse is down in the field actually. He walked out there to check it. He stepped on the same power line and killed himself also with the wires down. So when you're responding to a vegetation fire, one, we have to remember electrical lines do happen quite often. But when you see a fire off the road, roadside or out in the field, always ask yourself what started this fire. And that's a safety message we need to make sure that we relay to incoming crews, wires down, fires underneath power poles or lines to make sure everybody's looking and heads up. Again, remember the grass will grow back. Even all these fires that go off of Meese Road had a 500-acre fire last year. You go out there today, it looks exactly the same it did a year ago before the fire. So don't put our life safety out there in under power lines. We can work around it, go indirect, but always ask yourself what started this fire.
So with regard to that, like I know a lot of times we're cutting fences to make access. What's down across that fence, you know, a quarter mile down? Does it have the ability to energize that fence all the way to where you're cutting the fence? So just keep those kind of things in mind. If the dispatch looks like it might involve power lines, take precaution on that.
Okay, so I think we've hit size up pretty good, so we're just going to continue moving along. Okay, let's talk size up. So you're the first aid company officer. This is what you're arriving to. What's your size up and what are you thinking?
You know what I find interesting on that picture, Grant, is looking at what I kind of hard to say the head, but the head is actually, the smoke is going to the left, but I'm also looking at the smoke production on the flanks that are closer to the left side, and I'm not seeing as much smoke. So something is burning, and maybe that is the heel. It does look like the heel, the way the smoke's going, but something there at the heel of that is burning from what I'm seeing from that picture. And it's starting to kind of lay over, so it's looks like it's got a little bit of wind aloft on it.
So just something to think about. You look at the terrain, you look at the fuel, so you got grass and oak, so more than likely this is the eastern end of Battalion 14, pushing up against the SRA, maybe Rancho Murrieta. So you're the first aid company officer. If one of the things I'd be thinking of right here, I'm going to have to wait for additional resources to get here. So the first question I'm going to ask myself, what initial actions can I take that'll make a difference on this fire? So do I try and pick a flank and start to mobile attack the flank, knowing that I'm out there by myself for the next 20, 30 minutes till we start getting additional resources in there? Or do I start establishing access points and come up with a plan? Who's in command right now? Who's in command of this fire? You're the first in company officer. Who's command?
You are.
You are.
Okay, the first in company officer is command. And we could talk about command. It's something we're very good at establishing command on structure fires. You know, first in engine arrives, passes command to the second due engine. Very seldom do you hear that first engine or second engine establishing command or passing command on vegetation fires. And that's something we could definitely work to improve upon. So you're the first in officer on this. You are command until relieved.
I think also looking at that picture too, this is where you can't bring a 1 or 2 acre mindset to this fire. This is going to be bigger, like you mentioned, multiple resources. But one of the things I'm looking at is I do see, it looks like a down in the bottom part of the picture. And as a first due, especially when your next company might be 15, 20 minutes out, it might be just keep the fire on the upper side of that dirt road. And you might have to, if I'm coming in on the, let's say from the right side, going in on the left, I'm pretty favorable there with the way the wind's blowing and the conditions that I don't have a head fire or flank fire coming at me. So if that fire is kind of making its run and it's hitting that road, I want to try to hold it at that road or let the fire buck the road and then make sure it doesn't jump over. Or at that point, once it hits the road, I've got a good anchor from that road, and maybe I start working that right flank back to the heel as long as everything holds. But if that fire hits that road and jumps it, I need to start going after the opposite side road and anchoring and trying to anchor and flanking that. Again, what other resources might you need? When you look at this, if you pull up and let's say the fire does jump the road, don't piecemeal this. Get ahead of it. Do you need, obviously you have a chief officer, but do you need another chief officer out there to help maybe run a division? Or do you need 3 pump and rolls? Do you need 5 pump and rolls? Do you need the dozer? Do you need the helicopter? That's part of that size up, good situational awareness of where you're at. But sometimes we have to sit and wait for the fire to come to us where it becomes favorable. Sometimes maybe we do go out into the green there on that right flank and access through the green and then cut through the side of the flank when it's favorable, knowing that fire could turn on us also. It's a dangerous operation, but can you go in there, break in, and then start anchoring and flanking the fire and getting to it? So a lot going on there and a lot of challenges for the first due company.
And I think for company officers, we can kind of simplify it by saying, can I catch it with the resources I have coming, and where is it going? And those should be the first 2 questions that when you arrive on scene after you give your size up, that you can expand on the information that you're giving the first in battalion chief. You know, what kind of resources am I going to need? Can I catch it with what we have coming, and where is it going to go?
I think the other part too, to jump on that, Ed, is your size up. How big's your fire? How many acres do I got? And what's the potential? So if you pull up and let's say on that one, it looks like you have about 5 acres with a slow to moderate rate of spread there, and you throw out a potential of 50, that should prod everybody coming in. If we request additional resources, they should all be in alignment with that 50 acre. If we now come in and say, hey, this is a moderate to rapid or the dangerous rate of spread that we're using, and I'm going to say potential of 200, 250. When you get on scene, this is probably not a 3 or 5 acre fire. It's probably a 30 to 40 acre fire when we have a potential of 200, 300, 400 acres. At that point, that should be causing, battalion chief, 5 engines, water tender, at least from one response, and maybe even multiple. You might be pushing 15 engines on this. Also too, in the SRA is having them a response with aircraft and other things coming in. So kind of keep that ongoing size up of what you got. Potential is huge.
I think another thing too, rarely do I give just one rate of spread on fires like that. What I'll typically do is give you a range, moderate to rapid rate of spread. And for me, that is trying to tell you that, hey, when the wind's on it, it's rapid. When it dies down, it's going down a moderate rate of spread, and I might be able to get in there and do something with it.
Well, Chief Russell was in the helicopter. Grant, you probably remember the fire on Florin Road that we had, where they arrived, and we had that moderate rate of spread. Jamie Poole was the captain. He did say, hey, potential of a couple hundred acres. Copter got on scene. Hey, no structure threat out in front of it. And while they were going to go get water, it changed. It went rapid rate of spread. And that thing was off to the races, structure threat and everything else. So it looks like we have a question coming in.
I have a comment from 25. They're saying they agree with Ed, but they also want to ask themselves, what are the values at risk? They would take a cold flank moving towards a house versus a hot flank moving towards a road.
Okay, I can't disagree with that that priority. My question would be the hot flank moving towards the road. What are your flame lengths and what's on the other side of that road if that road doesn't hold? And what's your time factor for that cold? So those are all additional things to ask yourself. And it's going to be situational dependent. There are no absolutes. I can't say everything's black and white. We operate primarily in the gray. So that's where you have to take your experience level and maybe the experience level of your crews and go, can we make the most difference by making sure that house doesn't burn? If that's the only thing, exposure that's out there, if it gets across the road and it's several thousand acres of nothing, then absolutely take that house every time. So
Yeah,
good comment.
Good comment. I think you got to ask yourself at that point, what kind of resources do I have coming in? A lot of the times we're bumping up against the city and we get type 1s. Can I put a type 1 at that house and have them protect that structure on that cold flank? Can I put a type 1 on a road and have them keep the fire from jumping to the other side, kind of bump along with the fire front, you know, until we can get some type 3s in here to make, or some mobile attack rigs to get make an actual attack on the fire. So I think we have a lot of options in a lot of our areas. And I know that you're going to have type 1s coming a lot of times from the city.
I think another thing I learned, I've taken it from a CAL FIRE guy. He says fires when they hit roads will hold at the road 90% of the time. So if you keep that in mind too, that can be part of your attack or strategy that you're going to use. But with that being said, if we start getting ember cast and other things where we have embers going over the line, and that's where we get probability of ignition, you'll start hearing the pig is what they call it. If it's a 90%, 85, 75% ember goes across, we're going to get spot fires, and that 90% rule gets challenged when stuff starts crossing the road. But I think a very good point. Do you take the cold flank or not? That's that decision. I think where Grant's going, if you've got it going to hit a road and you have structures right across the way or a barn full of hay or sheep, you might have to go protect the fire front on that one first and then come back and hook that or have that second address that.
Well, and I think from a company
The
officer
house.
standpoint, no one's going to tell you that you're wrong for going and protecting the structure. We might talk about it afterwards, but no BC or chief is going to tell you you were wrong for going and protecting that piece of property. So.
Okay, so next slide would go kind of moving along. So same thing, size up again. You are the first arriving engine, and I'd really like to hear some input from some of the stations out there. What are you seeing? What are your fuel conditions? What are your terrain? What are some of the things that you're considering as you arrive on this? And I understand this is a two-dimensional picture, everything's static, but let's talk through your thought process here. Okay, let's start with the real simple question. What's burning? What's our fuel bed? Is our fuel bed continuous? Is it sparse? Is it scattered? Is it heavy? Is it light? Is it mixed? Bueller?
I think looking at too is, obviously we're looking at a backing fire on this flank here. What's going on that other side, right? So when you pull up here and you see this, obviously you want a good 360 of where's the head of this fire going. On this one here also too, you could go direct. You could put a dozer line in, a straight line.
Okay, we have someone raising their hand.
All right, 65, you're going to need to unmute yourselves when I click the button here so you can talk to us. Unmute on your end and you can ask your question or give us your comment.
Okay, we're looking at continuous fuels going up a hill. The guys want to know where's the head of the fire? What's the value of what we have out in front of us? Do we have structures that we can't see? And exactly who else do we have coming in to help support the initial operation?
Yeah, all those are great questions to ask. of yourself. And, just based upon what I'm seeing right here, if it was me, I would say we could do a lot of work with a type 3 with 500 gallons on a fire that has, what looks like 2 or 3 foot flame lengths and is backing against the wind. So, like you said, you can't see what looks like it might be down over the edge of that hill or off to the left side of that picture. If there is a head fire, or if that's all you have right there.
Okay, another question. So, what generally does fire do downhill? So, you look to me, I'm seeing what looks like a ridge line. Looks like the fires hit the ridge line. Do fires generally run downhill, or do they tend to back downhill? And how would we find out? So, where's the best vantage point in this picture to try and figure out what's going on with your fire? Okay, top of the ridge. How do we get to the top of the ridge? Do we drive up to the top of the ridge in the green and or the black if there's no road?
I'm going to say we go through the black.
Okay, good answer. Drive through
So
the black.
what would be the concerns of maybe working on the bottom of this down in the green? What are some concerns there?
Well, if you're in terrain, you always have the risk of rollout, but in predominantly light flashy fuels such as grass, you really don't get rollout. Rollout something that occurs in heavier fuels, timber, brush, your brush fuel model.
So you could work in something like that, but you'd have to mitigate that risk, right? And it might be having a lookout watching there what's going on. So not to say you can't. When we were on the Thomas fire, there was the firefighter that got killed. He actually went after a fire downhill. And when he got down there, the fire actually had spotted, or whether it was rollout or spotting below him, and he was unable to climb back out. So he kept trying to go downhill, and the fire ended up flanking him. So just kind of keep those things in mind, your tactics. But I do like where you're coming in from the top. The dozer is another aspect you could use. Dozer on that could go direct right on the line. One of the things looking for, you saw the line. If we go back to that picture real quick, if you look at that fire, it's not a clear-cut line. There's a lot of ins and outs. I mean, it's pretty steady all the way around. But if, let's say, the bottom of the picture is actually a road, and you had a dozer line from the top, and he just makes a straight line down through the green, let's say 30 feet off the main line, that fire's just going to slowly walk back right into that dozer line, and we're good. He just needs to make sure he's down to bare mineral dirt, get rid of that continuous fuel bed, and then let the fire back into the line, and we're good. You could bring another crew that maybe drags fire off of that dozer line there just to clean it up. But I'm having a feeling on this fire that the left side of the picture is we don't have eyes on it. And I like where 65 you came in, you answered that, is what's going on over there. And as a first due company coming in, you might need to make a hot lap on that 360 we talk about, not only on structures, but on a fire. Is where's this thing going? What's out ahead of it? What are the risks? Where are the values? I mean, if it's hit a road and it's holding, good. Go after this flank here. But if it's not, you need to let this one go for a little bit, because it looks like you got some time you can buy, and then go after the hot flank on the opposite side.
Well, and I think that's another good point when I coming back to what I said. Where's it going, and do I have can I catch this thing with the resources I have coming? Well, on that one, if it's just you out there and you're the first arriving engine company, you're probably not going to be able to catch that until you get some more resources. So the best thing you might be able to do is get out to that point out there where that structure is at, and let people know where to be and what they have coming in. In a situation like that, I mean, it's grass. It's going to burn. Like the chief said, it's going to look the same next year as it did this year. So you might just be able to be better off just to get up there and let people know, what you're seeing coming in.
Hey, let me jump on that one too.
I think Joe's got someone on.
Go ahead, Joe.
65 wants to know what's the time of day. Do we know if there's a wind shift that's typical each time in certain areas, such as what happens in Rancho Marietta?
I think Ed may have mentioned the structures there, and some of that first due, I think I'm going to kind of throw on the BC mindset here. If we got into Rancho Marietta, one of the things I would share with people is when the fire's chaotic from a IC standpoint, let it be chaotic. Engine companies are going to identify pretty quick whether I need to jump on a structure or whether I need to anchor and flank. But if we have a life safety threat, structure threat, those are obviously going to be the priorities over just the grass. And so your first two companies may be jumping on those very rapidly, and it might seem chaotic, but I would say just take a step back, get your arms around it, get your box, get those additional resources coming. And then when you get other players coming in, then you can assign that left flank, right flank, or division it out and then assign those companies that are doing structured defense in that area because they might be overloaded. But just remember some of that chaos, it's okay.
And I want to touch on what you said, but I want to go back to 65's question real quick. I think you guys can pick any time of the day you want. Talk about it if that fire was happening in the morning. Talk about it if it was at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Talk about the, what kind of a weight you have on it backing. I mean, obviously the pictures kind of sets that tone, but, so talk about different situations when you guys are in the station talking. And as far as, I forgot what I was going to talk about with you. What were you saying?
Structure, just jumping on what the priority may be.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I totally agree there. But setting that tone from the beginning is what's going to drive the rest
Absolutely.
of that fire.
Next slide. Okay, so we're going to continue moving on. Plan the attack. What does a good plan contain? So the first thing you need to do is, and Ed's already hit on this, is match your resource capabilities to your rate of spread. So if you have a moderate to rapid or dangerous rate of spread, do you want to assign a Type 1 engine to try and catch that head? Because the Type 1 engine's not going to be able to mobile attack. They're going to be progressive hose lay. They're not going to be able to keep up with the head of that fire, let alone catch it. Base your strategy on exhibited and predicted fire behavior. What are you seeing and what do you think is going to happen? Are you getting a lot of wind gusts? Is the wind steady? Are things changing on you? And don't lock into a plan and not adapt to change. So you need to be flexible, and as conditions change, we need to change our strategy and our tactics sometimes. We may need to go from direct to indirect, or maybe we're going indirect, and now we have to, the opportunity changes, we get a little bit of a wind shift, and maybe now the flank that we were indirect on, we can now go direct on. So same as with our structure fires, offensive, defensive, or a combination of both strategies.
Or direct or indirect, right?
Yep.
And I think you make a good point on the rate of spread there from, when we have a slow rate of spread, that is a mobile attack fire. Getting into the moderate range, we start kind of questioning whether or not we're going to be able to catch that. And when we start talking moderate, going even a mobile attack or even progressive hose lay, things start catching us. So that's where our conditions favorable. And once we get to a rapid rate of spread, yes, we need to anchor and flank the fire, but the fire is probably going to leave us. So we have to start looking at indirect methods or picking boundaries where we're going to hold that fire.
And I think to pick up on what you were saying too, if you're an engine company out there and it's a rapid rate of spread and you're not going to be able to catch it, there's no need to race to catch it. Make sure you're putting down a good wet line. Make sure stuff's not getting out and around you where we have to send somebody back to redo your work. I think that's something that we've seen in the past couple of years.
Yeah, and if I can jump on that one, I had last summer we had a few fires, and I did talk with Cal Fire's Air Attack, and I talked with Cal Fire's ICs. And one of the challenges they had with fires within Metro Fire's jurisdictions was just what you were saying, is everybody was in such a hurry hitting the flanks, trying to catch the head of the fire, and they were kind of bringing a 5 to 10 acre mindset to that fire. It's now 500, it's 1,000, it's 2,000 acres. And so there's an old adage that is always said that says, don't lose real estate you paid for. So if you can arrive on scene, and I'll take let's take the fire out on Meese Road as a great example. The fire on Meese Road had 3 flanks that were running, 500 acre fire. And the left flank, we didn't anchor and flank. We didn't get down to mineral dirt. This isn't to beat people up. This is lessons learned. We got to anchor and flank. We've got to get down to mineral dirt with the dozer. We've got to hold that line. And it might be when the BC Cal Fire arrives going, hey, look, the fire on the head of the fire and the right flank are out of control. I got nothing on there, but I do have good solid line on the left. I've anchored and flanked the left line. I got good perimeter control, and we're going to hold that line. When I say hold that line, the crews have to maintain from the anchor all the way up to where the head of the fire, and it could be miles literally miles. You've got to hold that with the resources and not get too far ahead of yourself. The Jackson Grant Line fire that went out, crews kept going after the head, and then they had the breakouts that bit them. And then air attack, instead of focusing on the head of the fire and structure defense up ahead of it, they have to come back, reinforce that line or try to hold that line and then cruise. So they lost line that they'd already paid for. So remember, anchor and flank, perimeter control, hold that line. And part of it might just be going, hey, I've got one good flank for you for right now. The other two are out of control. And then build the plan to be able to address those other flanks.
So if you're continuously getting outflanked and having to go back, you need to go all the way back, establish an anchor point, and start building line from your anchor point forward. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the tactics and strategy and different techniques we can move in the next part after our break. But we'll go ahead and get back to just talk about planning your attack and indirect versus direct, defensive versus offensive. So defensive strategy is indirect and uses the use of backburning and burnouts. And we'll hit those two topics in depth pretty soon here. Offensive, direct tactics, your flank and attack, parallel, pincer, frontal, tandem. And those are all should be hitting those in your RT-130, S-190 refreshers and target solutions or vector safety, whatever they changed the name to. So next slide. Okay, defensive strategy. Indirect tactics are used. So use burnouts and backfiring. So one of the best tools we have here at Metro Fire for indirect attack is the dozer. And I think sometimes we aren't using it to its full capability. And I hope to slowly change that mindset is if the dozer's in there punching line in, let the dozer do the work. Let's support their work. Let's not beat ourselves up to repeat the work they're doing. So indirect defensive strategy, you don't have enough resources to extinguish the fire you have. So you're trying to come out to roads, natural barriers, and the fire is going to get bigger, but we're going to try and contain it on our grounds with lack of resources. You may have to protect exposures and just go in and maybe you just protect a structure, a house, and let the fire go right on by it because we can't stop the fire. Interface situations, heavy fuels, and pretty much when you get to defensive, the key is to make the best of a bad situation. So you have a road, you think you can hold the road. Instead of going direct on that flank, think about putting fire down on that road. And we'll talk about some scenarios in a little bit where you can use that. And the biggest one, put your resources where they're going to do the most good. So 25 made the comment of going out and protecting the structure. So they have that one flank, they can protect that structure first, and you have limited resources, and that's where you're going to do the most good on that fire, then that's absolutely what you need to be doing.
Let me jump on that one too. One of the things is on an incident that you have, don't throw resources like darts at a board. I think where Chief Russell's going on that is if you're going to protect the structures and one engine maybe can't do it, fill that order to protect those structures. Let the other flanks go for now, but don't just throw one on the left flank, one on the right flank, one on a structure here and there. I mean, have a plan and get a plan to where you're going to anchor and flank and hold one line and support that line or go up and do structure defense until you can get the resources there. But don't throw resources like darts. And then when people arrive, you've got 3 out of control flanks and really no progress on it. Look at something that you can have progress and you're handing a bad situation, but you're handing it better to the next guy coming in, taking it over for you.
One other thing I'd like to touch on what Chief Russell said. Excuse me. So support. The bottom line is crews on the ground, put fire out. That's the only people who do it. The helicopter can help you out by knocking the fire down, but they need to be supported. So typically your helicopter or your dozer, unless they have support coming in behind them, they're not going to be extremely effective. The dozer much more so than the helicopter in putting the fire out, but it needs to be mopped up. The dozer pushes up huge piles that have burning material in them. We see it all the time down on the parkway. Those things need to you need to get in there, break them up, and actually extinguish the fire. So having units there to support those actions, that's huge.
So indirect attack, it's a defensive tactic used when direct methods are either unsafe or ineffective due to the fire's intensity. So pretty much mobile attack and direct attack are effective till you get to about 8 to 11 foot flame lengths. And then that becomes a very ineffective tactic just because the BTUs from the fire and the rate of spread with that kind of flame lengths are more than we can keep up. So that's when we look to withdraw to roads, barriers, and then burn out our fuels, which when we do burnouts from roads or barriers, what we're doing is we're strengthening our control lines. So we're trying to make our area, we're trying to remove the fuel that's out in front of the fire to stop that fire at a pre-established barrier. When we do this, the fire is going to get bigger, and that's needs to be part of your plan. So when you order your resources or are coming up with your plan need for resources, take that into account. What is your plan? If we're going indirect, you're probably going to need more resources eventually on that fire. So what's your lag time? Where are your resources coming from? And what else is going on in the county? So are there 2 other large grass fires, and the resources you have are the resources you're going to have, you're not getting anymore because they're not available? And one of the things to think about is when you're going indirect, you're placing firefighters away from the main fire, fuel between them and where you're trying to hold that fire. So that's something that requires us to have lookouts in place.
I think with regard to indirect attack, I think with regard to indirect attack, it's important to mention too, I haven't seen it in a while, but back in the, several years ago, guys would put fire on the ground and you'd look behind you and there's an engine coming along putting the fire out. The idea, if we're burning something out, the idea is not to be using water. I mean, that's the whole reason we do it, so that we can, you might mop up the edge, but we're firing off a road. Well, the idea is not to have to put any water down to be able to control that fire. So know who's doing the burnout, know where the burnout's at, and don't be putting out the burn.
Okay, welcome back. Hope everybody got another cup of coffee, stay awake during this, and we'll go ahead and get back on track with Wildland PDP. So to get this next section started, you're arriving on a vegetation fire in Battalion 9, and the IC has just assigned you to establish firing group, and your job is to fire Florin Road and Eagle's Nest. What are you thinking, and what are you going to do? Because this next section, we're going to talk about backfiring and firing. 2 totally different things, but you're at Eagle's Nest and Florin Road, and you've been assigned to firing group.
Engine 101 wants a holding group as well as a firing group.
Okay. What do you need for your holding group? How many resources do you need?
Engine 101, what do you want included in your holding group?
Can one engine do all that? Can one
Depends.
engine start it?
Depends.
Yeah, how big's our fire?
I think how fast you fire is going to depend on your holding group. So, when we get out there and I only have 2 engines assigned to holding and I can't get any more, well, then we're not going to take that fire down Eagle's Nest or Florin Road super quick.
Can a Type 1 engine fire? That's my question. What do you think about that?
Absolutely.
I would, if it were,
You heard it.
Hey, I'm just trying to fill it up. You got me on camera too.
Yep, we're recording.
So
too.
looking at the tools that we have, right? Can a Type 1 engine fire? And you pose that question, we'd ask the question, why would we need to fire Eagle's Nest and Florin Road? Why? And if that's an issue, can a Type 1 do it? Can a pump and roll do it? Do they have the tools to do it? Can a single engine do it or start it, right? So Grant, what do you need for firing? What are the basics that we need, and what gives them the legal authority to do so?
Well, we're going to move into that. So I think the first thing we're going to do is what's the difference between a backfire and a burnout or a firing operation? Backfiring. So if as the IC, somebody comes back to me and tells me that they're going to start a backfire at Florin and Eagle's Nest, I have a whole lot of questions for you at that point because first of all, backfiring is an indirect defensive tactic, and it takes a lot of coordination and a lot of skill to be able to pull off a backfire. So backfire is you're trying to use the fire you're setting to influence the head of the main fire. So your plan is you're trying to get the main fire smoke column to draw in your backfire off the road. So it's a very aggressive it's a defensive tactic, but it tends to be used in an offensive manner, if that makes sense. And the big thing is backfires have to be approved by the IC. Firing operations or burnout operations can be approved by the division, but a backfire needs to be approved by the IC. And it involves extensive burning under adverse conditions. So let's talk about adverse conditions. What's adverse versus favorable firing conditions? And the easiest way to think about this, you're in favorable firing conditions when you put fire on the ground and you're not in the smoke. The smoke and fire are carrying right off the line where you're putting it. Adverse is as soon as you put that fire on the line, it's burning back into your line and you're standing in the smoke. And backfires are always going to be done in adverse conditions because you're out in front of the head and it's coming towards you and you're going to be in the smoke. Backfires also take extensive holding crews because you have a high probability of getting spot fires across your line, and it requires lookouts and experience and skill level. Burning out can be a direct or an indirect tactic, and pretty much you're just setting fire between your control line and the approaching fire to strengthen your control line. Done on small scale, can be done on flanks, can be done on the heel. And one of the biggest places we could be doing burning out operations that we tend not to is in support of the dozer. So when the dozer's punching in line, if the dozer's indirect, they're 20 or 30 feet off the line and we have an engine supporting them, that engine should be burning out that little strip of land right behind the dozer. So as Chief Jenkins said, this is a firing operation that can be done by one engine. You have one lighter, you have one person on the nozzle and one person driving your pump and roll. And ideally, like Captain Henderson said a little while ago, the goal here is to not use any water. So we're just making sure we have solid black line from our dozer. And the engine is really, as long as the fire and smokers are on the black side of the line and not the green, should be using absolutely no water. They're looking for anything that's on the green side of the line, and they're back behind the lighter. You're letting that fire burn together, burn from the dozer line to the main fire as that dozer continues to construct line. And eventually maybe we get around the head and the dozer is able to go direct and we're done. But it's something that should take very little to no water. There is no specific district policy regarding its use here at Metro Fire. So know your BC, know your IC, and talk about it with them before you are in the situation where you need to put fire on the ground. So, question for everybody. Do you have to be certified to put fire on the ground?
While they're waiting on that one, let me ask you a question, Grant and Ed. If the dozer line is put in play and the fire has bumped the line, but we have those eyebrows of unburned fuel, what do we call on that if we just want to take those little eyebrows out? Is that firing out? Is that burning out? What do we call that?
So I think, I mean, for me, typically you're going to hear, the term you're going to hear is probably to square this thing up. Okay, so that means we're going to go through where the dozer's gone and we're going to put fire on the ground and we're going to square it up where it comes out right along that dozer line. Whatever that happens to be, it might be Eagle's Nest and Florin Road. So I think typically that's the term that is going to be most commonly thrown out there.
Taking out the unburned fuel along the line.
Yeah, you're going to burn that out or fire that out.
Yep. Fire it out to help the fire along a little bit.
Yeah.
Some keywords in there.
But if you use the term backfiring, there's going to be a lot more questions, and that's probably going to require kind of a face-to-face planning process with the IC to come up with your firing operations plan, your backfiring plan.
So why would we want to take some of those eyebrows that are up against a dozer line? Why would we want to take some of those out while we're on scene?
It eliminates our mop-up.
Not only does it
Rekindle down the road, maybe?
not only does it eliminate that, but it also, you can pretty much leave that section of line and know that you're not going to have anything, you're not going to have any slop over there. So I think if you have 50 feet in between the dozer line and the main fire, you have the potential for rekindling enough head of steam to where it has the potential to jump your dozer line or whatever line you put in.
Anybody answer the question there?
No, sir.
Nothing yet, huh? So I think the big thing on burning out, Grant, I'll go back to our fire that we had that started on Florin Road that burned towards Jackson Highway, is getting crews out ahead of it on Jackson Highway and having the time to get them there, to get ahead of it. One was the fire was going to hit one of these wind-driven fires. If we go back and we look at them, they're really long and narrow, right? Wind-driven. But the head of that fire, when it hit Jackson Highway, the wide berth of that, with the homes and the fuel loading on the opposite side of the road, the fire did jump the road. But the good thing is we had a BC out there, we had engines out there, and when it did hit and jump, they were able to go after that. But you're right, adverse conditions, eating smoke. One of the things you can do is if you're on that road and you've got a head fire coming at you, and it's an uncomfortable situation to be, but if you put that burning out operation along that road, you're actually making a much more defensible space for yourself by making a bigger road in front of the head of the fire. And what I've seen happen on multiple times with that burning out operations is that fire is smoke's blowing at you, but as it starts sucking in that main fire and you got to have time to set it up, that column will actually kind of stand straight up a little bit and then start dropping a lot of the ember caps back into the main fire. It'll look like a nuclear bomb going off, but once the fuels are done, it goes right out.
Okay, we have a hand raised.
We do have a hand raised, and I have a couple of what looks like opposing comments. So this is good. So Chief Jenkins can clarify for us. 65 says in county, no. Out of county, yes. And it's a question mark from 65. 25 says, yes, you can put fire on the ground. You don't need to be a firing boss or firing to fire out a finger or an island.
So 25, good answer. So putting fire on the ground, using a drip torch, using firing devices is a basic firefighter skill. Everybody should have that basic skill level. The firing boss really comes into large scale firing operations on campaign incidents or prescribed fire. And training burns fall into the prescribed fire. That's why we have firing bosses within Metro Fire, so we can do live fire training and we do it as a prescription fire. When you go out of county, so this gets a little complicated. So you have the Public Resource Code, which allows us to put fire on the ground. But if you're in the SRA and it's not within Metro Fire's jurisdiction, so we don't have jurisdictional authority, we have to have the consent and the permission of the agency having land management. So the SRA is CAL FIRE. The forests is U.S. Forest Service or the Federal Land Management Agency. You have to have that agency's permission to put fire on the ground. So if you're out of county on a large fire, the Land Management Agency, and usually they're going to have representatives that are assigned that will be able to approve that. It's not that big a deal. The the Health and Safety Code, though, kind of contradicts the Public Resource Code a little bit. And that is, the Public Resource Code is what allows us as an agency to put fire on the ground without having land management permission. So in the SRA, within our own jurisdiction, under the Public Resource Code, we can put fire on the ground without CAL FIRE's approval.
So I think what Grant's got, the simplified answer is there's a lot more levels of authorization that are required on a campaign fire than on a typical in-county fire. Correct?
Pretty much, except usually on a campaign fire, there's a plan already in place. You get assigned to a division, it's firing, it's already pre-approved. So you're going to go out, you're going to implement the plan. It's already been signed off by the IC and the division. That's part of their control objectives for that operational period. And you don't have to go through this big approval process. Yeah, you're going to go through your go, no-go firing checklist, which will usually be in the IAP. The DIB will brief that, your strike team leader will brief that, and that's your go, no-go. And if you meet all those steps in that process, then you light your test fire and you start your burning.
So there's the question of, can we do it or can we not do it? But then there's also, does someone need to be certified to do it? Once they get permission, do they also need to be certified to do it?
No. So like I said, putting fire on the ground and basic burning out operations is a basic firefighter one skill. So to do that, all you need to do is you need to have a plan, and your plan is as simple as, do I have a starting and an end point? And what are we burning, and where are we trying to burn out? So we're going to fire from Eagles Nest Road to the Dozer line along Florin Road. Okay, Eagles Nest is your starting point. The Dozer line is your end point. We're taking fire along Florin Road, and you just have a firefighter striking fire along the edge, and Holdings making sure it doesn't spot to the wrong side of Florin Road. And there's your firing plan, and you let the IC know this is our plan, and the IC either goes yay or nay, or your division goes yay or nay.
So one of the things to jump on that, I know we're talking firing, and I know it gets fun and gets exciting, but we always have to remember when we deal, it's the saying, if we let the genie out of the bottle, we own it, right? So I do know that there are certain players, and I know I had, when Chief Russell was a captain, he was kind of my go-to guy that I would grab, and I would assign companies to him to do the firing for me. So part of those are those relationship buildings on understanding what it is. I know where Grant is. I know where Grant was up in the copter, and I had a company in the past that I said, hey, I need you to take out this corner, right? And they hadn't done that before. That direction given, take out the corner with drip torches or fusees, absolutely take out the corner. Or I need you to fire from here to here. Somebody's going to give you that direction, absolutely go ahead and fire it. One of the things we want to do is have a more educated workforce, and that's our firing classes, S234, if it's still S234.
219.
What is it now?
It's at 219.
Now 219. Advanced, and then you got where Grant is as a firing boss, and that's when we get into a lot of our vegetation management plans or a planned burning. So what I would say, though, is I give direction to the BCs on C shift that this is the time of year right now to start practicing some of this on lot fires, squaring things off, firing off the duals, a wet line, while the conditions are favorable now. If we don't practice now, we can't just go out on a red flag condition with 40-mile-an-hour winds and now say put fire on the ground. So one, we got to be safe. We own it when we put it on the ground, and we got to have mitigation factors in there. Engines holding, lookouts like we talked about. But try on some of these lots, maybe taking it to the parking lot, taking it out to the road, or getting out ahead of it, put a nice wet line out in front of the fire, and then fire off your wet line. It can be a time where we can do all that stuff. Now, remember, too, when we start doing this fuel, especially when we get down on the parkway with a lot of dead fuel loading, we may need to sit on that for sometimes a day or two or three for those fuels to burn out. And sometimes it's best just to go put the dang fire out. If we do have the opportunity, especially in the flashy fuels, that we can square it off and put a wet line down, or, hey, let it burn to the parking lot, or better yet, I'm going to help it along. I'm going to fire along this parking lot, this road in that corner, and we're just going to let this thing come together and call it good. Try to fight fire using the less water you can. Yes, we can do that and coordinate. Right now with the fuels is the time to start practicing that. And that's some of the directions. So any questions on that, feel free to hit up the training staff, and we can clarify if needed.
So, and I also think that, with regard to what Chief Jenkins said, if somebody asks you, if one of your chiefs asks you to burn it out, take it as a compliment, but also be honest with them and yourselves. Can I do what he's asking me to do? Do I have the experience? Do I have the knowledge? What's the potential for it to get away and cause more problems than we already have? So, like I said, we talked about having experience and the skill to do so. And I think a lot of us around here do, especially if we're backfiring. If we're burning out, backfiring might be a whole different scenario. So,
and you're making a great point there. I think that's the IC may throw out. What do you think about firing off the road from Florin? If you see something that's going, hey, this is not a good idea. And again, sometimes when we start firing, we do need somebody to come in and say, hey, stop firing, we're good. The Jackson fire we had years ago, I know we were firing, the fire overran us like 3 different times. And I remember we kept firing, trying to divert the fire, and it was working. It was out of control, but we finally hit a point where we had a barn full of sheep that was about ready to go up. And somebody had to come up and said, hey, stop firing. We're creating a worse situation than what's going on, or the effectiveness had fallen off. So remember that too, is especially if the fire starts spotting over the line, that's a good time to hold firing, go get those spots. We're good after we got those out, then come back and commence firing. But
And that's a great point. You don't have to keep firing.
correct.
You know, if you've got too much fire for you to handle, slow it down. Maybe one torch instead of two. You know, maybe stop altogether and just pull off the line for a minute and let it do its thing. And then when it dies down, go back to firing again. So that's, you know, situationally dependent.
And we're going to have some opportunity this coming next couple of months or weeks here. Chief Russell, you want to elaborate on that?
So we do have about 8 properties available for vegetation management / training burns this coming spring and early summer. So just because we're in July or August, sometimes the weather conditions are perfect for us to burn in our field conditions. So we're going to be doing some focused training that'll be not focused on suppression, but focused on getting people comfortable putting fire on the ground. So they're going to be battalion level firing operations drills coming up. So if you're interested in that, let your BCs know, because they'll be the ones scheduling as the opportunities arise. Looks like we have a hand raised.
Yeah, 25 is saying that we may need to scout before putting fire on the ground and also watch for homeless camps in these lot fires.
Okay, that's a
Ding, ding,
actually outstanding point about the homeless camp. So we talk about vegetation fire and life priority, and you have a homeless camp out. There's a potential for a life priority. So we need to do evacuation of that camp, and we need to do a primary search of that camp, for lack of a better term, and make sure that those tents are all vacant. There's also a lot of other hazards that come with homeless camps. And I think we've had a couple examples in the last year where I think it was 117 had a homeless camp that had a propane cylinder explode. And then more recently, I believe there was a call down on the Parkway where one or two homeless had decided they were going to become gold miners, and had actually constructed a below grade gold mine at a camp where it dropped down about 20 feet and then had a shaft that went horizontal. So if you're out mobile attacking a progressive hose layer, are you looking for a pit that drops 20, 25 feet down? It's just something to think about, and scouting is a great point. As far as scouting before your firing or your burnout operation, that's going to be situational dependent. If you're just burning out a dozer line, you're probably not going to scout that. You're going to have a very simple firing operations plan. If you have a large scale backfire, or you're firing out an entire division, then yeah, absolutely you're going to want to scout that out before you go ahead and put fire down on the ground. So we're going to keep this moving along. I think we have a couple slides coming up that's going to put into perspective pretty much a simple firing operation that talks about taking the corner out and squaring it off. So if we can go ahead and. Okay, so next slides, here we are. So you have a fire that started on a road. I don't know what road that is. We'll just call it Sunrise, and you have Kiefer on the south. So you have engine 65, 366, and engine 68. So 66 comes in. They anchor the left flank at Sunrise, and they're putting in their mobile attack, taking that left flank out. While they're doing that, engine 65 and engine 68 arrive on scene, and they decide, hey, we can just fire off of Kiefer here, and we're going to take fire from Kiefer to the corner of Sunrise and square this whole thing off so we don't have to mobile attack an entire second flank of the fire. So their start point is out in front of the fire. So to be clear here, yes, we're coming across the head of the fire, but we're not backfiring. We're firing out our control line. We're strengthening that control line, and we're not planning or trying to use the influence of the column or the main head of that fire on the fire we're putting in. We're just trying to strengthen and make our control line at Kiefer a little bit wider. Eventually, it is going to get pulled into the main fire, but that is not the intent of what we're doing here. What we're doing here is we're strengthening, making that main control line wider, so when the fire does hit it, it has a higher percentage or a higher chance of not spotting across. So ideally, you want to make that control line 2 or 3 times wider than it was before the main fire hits. So as 366 is anchoring and they're going down that flank, we're going to start our firing operation on Kiefer, and we're going to start taking it towards Sunrise. Here you have a perfect example of a Type 1 engine and a Type 3 engine that can work in tandem. You can use the personnel off the Type 1 to actually be your firing crew, and your pump and roll or Type 3 is your holding crew. So as they progress towards that corner, they're going to increase the depth of that line. And we can go to the next slide. So as 366 comes in and ties that flank now into Kiefer, 65 and 68 have now taken the fire to Sunrise. They've hit the corner. They're taking the corner out. So one of the things when you fire a corner is you never want to do 90 degrees. So you want to do your corners at 45s. And that's so you don't create fire whirls in the corners, because you can create a fire whirl by doing a 90 degree in a corner. And then they're just going to tie that fire along Sunrise back into that main flank, and they're going to let that whole corner burn out. And we have one side of the fire that needs to be extensively mopped up.
Go back to the previous slide.
Yes.
One thing to talk about if we're going to do this operation is 366 needs to be far enough down that left flank where they can catch it. If we light at like position number 1, is 366 far enough down that left flank where they can catch it when it hits the road, or are we going to have it hook around what we
Tie it back in.
tie it back in? So I think that if you're 365 and you're starting the burn operation, that's a huge consideration right there. How far, where's my next piece of equipment coming from, or is 366 far enough down that left flank?
So I think one of the things, we're all sitting here looking at a screen, sitting in a room, or you guys are sitting back at the fire station talking about this, and you can see all the moving parts. So what I recommend is you do drive out to areas in your first 2 areas and start looking at how would you run a firing op or a backfiring or firing out. Take the direction. This one here, obviously, it looks like kind of a north wind, coming from the northwest. Blowing to the southeast, which is not a prevailing wind around here. You know, prevailing wind is southwest, burning northeast. But start looking at those. Where would you do it? Where would you stop it? Where would you hang it up? 25. You did mention your homeless camp. You guys don't have homeless camps out in the 25s area. I do want to jump on that a little bit too, and I think it was brought up. These aren't just Class A fires anymore. You know, when they're going through a homeless camp, you've got computers, you've got batteries, you've got all the other stuff, needles, and it's gonna burn. And so I do want to jump on the Aerojet fire we had recently. And this one, they actually accessed from a train trestle that crossed the South Canal over off of Mercantile, and went into Aerojet property, way out into the middle of Aerojet property, and they were burning the insulation off of copper wires. So access was very, very difficult for the crews to find and locate that fire. But here we are in April, and I think when it all said and done, we got about 10 acres of property. This happens in the middle of July. You're going to have 100 acres or more on you before you can even access the fire. So they are out there. They are accessing areas, living in areas. I think we're going to see a huge influx of the homeless population and that life threat of them being in it. But a lot of these little cities that are building, it's not just a veg fire. It can be also your Class B combustibles going up in there too.
So if we go back to that slide, so looking at this slide, looking where our wind's coming from, are we firing in favorable or unfavorable conditions? And
Remember, if the smoke's in your face, right?
so where's our wind coming from? What direction is the wind from? And where are we putting fire on the ground? Are we favorable or unfavorable?
65 says favorable.
We're in unfavorable. So 50-50 chance. So wind's in our face. As soon as we put fire on the ground, the smoke's blowing right back at us. Unfavorable conditions. So just something to think about. It's unfavorable conditions are a little harder to hold just because your personnel are in the smoke.
So why is that? I mean, if you think about it, if you're lighting the fire, it's a backing fire, right? That you're trying to, and remember, you don't want to be putting head fire on the ground. So I think where Ed was kind of going is making sure your engine 366 is up there towards the head and is getting ready to hook that head. If you're going to bring fire from that road, from let's say the number one back to where engine 65 is sitting, if you're going to walk it back, that's going to be that backing fire. It's going to try to burn into the wind, which doesn't go very well. That's why it works for us. But if you put stuff on the ground and let head fire loose, that can be very bad.
And I think the next question is, does that mean we can't burn it because the wind's at our face? I mean, in my opinion, we can still burn it. So when I take that strip from 1 down to 4, I'm not going to take as big a chunk right off the bat. Maybe I'm going to take 2 or 3 foot strips off the edge, something that I can control that fire, and then another 2 or 3, so I'm going to take 2 or 3 foot chunks off the road into the black, and keep it to where I can control it. So we can still burn it even with the wind. We just have to take it a lot slower and keep that in mind. How much time do I have before that main fire hits me? Do I have the time to do what's being asked?
And Ed, you make a very good point too, especially when you're firing is don't go so fast that you can't control the fire you just put down. You want it to get good depth, get in there to now where it takes off and it's good, but you can hold that line if anything is to go south. Very good point.
Okay, so you're showing up, you've been assigned a firing operation, and we've talked about implementing a plan. So how are you going to set up a firing operation? Let's hear from somebody out in one of the stations. What do you want in place, and how many people do you want? So let's start simple. You've been assigned to support the right flank of the fire behind Dozer 1. Dozer 1's going indirect on that flank. What do you want to be able to fire out behind the Dozer line? What are the resources? What's your firing plan? What's your organization?
Ed, you want to give us some of your thoughts while we're waiting for somebody else to?
Say that again. Where is the Dozer line being?
Dozer line's going indirect. They're about 50 to 100 feet off the main fire line. They're working the right flank, and you've been assigned to support their operation, and if you can, to fire that flank behind the Dozer.
So based upon my wind direction right there, fire appears to be burning back. It's going to be a backing fire by the time it hits the Dozer. If the wind direction continues along that same path, as soon as the Dozer comes by, I'm going to let them get out in front of me, probably 50 to 100 feet, and then I'm going to come by and just light it from the edge, let it burn back into itself.
Okay, so based upon what you're seeing there, are we in favorable or unfavorable conditions?
We're in favorable conditions at that point to be able to burn that thing back into itself. And I mean, unless something changes, I'm probably looking at 1, maybe 2 engines to be able to hold that Dozer line. But that being said, something that can get up the Dozer line as well.
So matching your resource capabilities with your needs. So a pump and roll, type 3 or type 5. Anybody out in the stations have any additional input, insight, questions, suggestions, points of view?
Not at this time.
Okay, well, we'll keep moving this along then. Okay, offensive strategy. You have enough resources to control the fire. Fire is controlled before it reaches high value exposures. So like I said before, the best structure defense is perimeter control. If we can put the fire out before it hits the structures, then we don't need to go establish a structure group. We don't need to commit a bunch of resources to protecting or defending structures. If you can take the flank of fire headed for houses out before it gets to the houses, that is absolutely the best structure defense there is. Extinguishment takes care of our exposures, and here we can talk about direct, parallel, and burnout tactics can be used. So burnout can be offensive as well.
So Grant, you did mention in there, we talk about structure defense or structure group. What do we typically like to do when you talk about perimeter control? Can we put all those assignments into a division? Do we need a structure group? Where do we want to go on a lot of this? What's the trends?
Well, honestly, personally, for what we do in our area, I believe just having a division manage that instead of putting a structured group within a division. So we have to remember, and we'll get to this in a little bit, groups are functional, divisions branches or divisions or geographic, branches can be functional or geographic. So, and it all is based upon incident complexity. And we'll get to that in a little bit where we talk about setting our incident up.
65 did have a comment that came in, and they were saying they want to have a starting and an ending point if they're doing a firing operation.
Absolutely.
Every time.
That's great.
Okay, so you're firing out a dozer line. And so you're burning out the dozer line. So your starting point's going to be where the dozer anchored, because the dozer should be anchoring the flank of fire from a solid point. So they could be either anchoring off a wet line, starting up on that right flank. They're anchoring it on a road, in which case they anchor it on the road. And if they're between the edge of the fire and the road, we want to secure that anchor by bringing the black all the way out to the road in that corner. And as the dozer progresses up around, our end point is going to really be when the dozer ties that back into another anchor point. And we're just building fire, helping the dozer secure the line by burning out as we go. So our end point when you're firing a dozer line is not, when you start, you're not going, oh, when we get to this point, we're going to stop our firing off. When the dozer ties that in, or the dozer is able to suddenly go direct on the fire, that's our termination point. Make sense? Next slide. Oh, I did take this.
An aggressive offensive tactic. Direct attack is aggressive offensive tactic. Working on or near the fire's edge, used on low flames, less than 4 to 8 feet average. Must know escape routes and safety zones. Intense heat and smoke. I think the biggest thing is the escape routes and safety zones on there. In our area, we were talking about earlier, fighting fire from the green side. There's typically not a need to fight fire from the green around here. If the flame lengths are low enough, you most certainly can fight fire from the green, but just get into the black. If you have to cut yourself a gate, if it's a fire in the middle of a field and it's burning out, cut yourself a gate, get into the black, attack the fire from there. The black is going to be your best safety zone that we have. I think direct attack is obviously the preferred method, and it's the quickest method to extinguishing the fire. But depending on your situation, direct attack may look very, very different fire to fire.
So some of the tactics when we talk direct, you have your flank, your pincer, parallel, frontal. That's kind of like Ed just said, attacking from the green. Sometimes we may need to do that, but it's not a optimal tactic. Tandem attack and progressive hose lays. Next slide. Okay, so you're first in arriving officer on this incident. What are your incident priorities and what's your strategy? And there are no wrong answers. So I want to hear some people's perspectives. I want to hear what some of the different officers are thinking out in the stations.
You definitely need to be worried about access, right?
Yep. My first thing that pops out at me is you got a barbed wire fence. Okay, what's our fuel? What kind of a fuel bed are we looking at? And there's a lot of these in Battalion 9 right now. Probably even Battalion 14 and
Station 65 is saying harvested grass, direct attack, and they're also concerned about access to it.
okay. So harvested grass, so it's mowed, it looks like to me like it's a mowed hayfield or a mowed grain field. So you've got different fuel levels. So you've got piles and you also have stubble. Is this something we're going to be able to mobile attack? What's the smoke column telling us? Do we have a well-defined head?
What's burning? Making that black smoke, what's in it?
Okay. Access?
25 says we have light, flashy fuels, most receptive for a firing operation.
Burn it all.
Okay, so
I think the big thing too is continuous fuel bed, right? Obviously, I did like the harvested piece too. It looks like it's been, obviously cut, but it's not down to bare metal dirt. So we might not see the flame links because of the fuel being high, but we are going to see it skunk through that. You might see the fire skunk through that. Might look, like it's not doing a whole lot, but when it comes out of that and then hits the fuels that aren't harvested or knocked down, it's going to be off to the races.
So something to think about with this particular fire. So we've identified it's mowed hay. That's somebody's livelihood as well. So if we go and fire that field out, how much
Yes, good
crop
point.
damage have we now done to that farmer? Is that something they're relying on for the entire season? The other thing to think about is those mowed piles of hay. They're going to hold heat for a while. Fire's just not going to burn through it, and we're done. We're going to have to go up, break all those up. It's just essentially hay that hasn't been baled yet, so it's pretty dense. And then if the wind hits that, it can blow it right back out. So we have to be real good with our perimeter control on this
And
incident.
good points on that. I mean, the other part too is the irrigation that these farmers put in there, and also putting a dozer down. A lot of them might not be too hip with a dozer coming in there. Now that's going to be on a fire. Let's just say we can go out there and go get it, right? We had a fire that had started over in Wilton's jurisdiction a few years back, and it took off and burned through a solar field. And out of control fire, we actually had a firefighter got separated from the crew, which saw him out running in front of the head of the fire, which got a little hairy there for a bit. Out of control fire. And we ended up firing the road off of Meese Road in front of that fire. And believe me, we did not have a happy owner, but we had to make a decision. That fire was going to jump that road. We had on the other side of the road stacks of hay. I mean, 60, 70, 80 feet high. That if we lost that, we were taking it all the way to Jackson Highway. So at that point, we have to make a decision, but we can justify firing the road into that guy's agricultural piece. On that fire there, if we can go get it, might not be the best operation for doing a firing issue. That's a ton of real estate to burn right there too. So just remember that. Yeah, we can put a blade across it. Yeah, we can cut it off. But when you talk about livelihood and farmers, is that the best decision? We have to roll all those out.
So inversely, if that field's already been harvested, the hay's already been baled, the farmer may actually prefer that his field burn off because sometimes that increases the harvest yield in the following year. So there's a lot of processes that need to take place in your decision-making process. Another thing to consider is, are there environmental concerns with an area? So say that field's not a harvested grass field, but that's a vernal pool preserve. So is that something that may affect our tactics? What happens when we put the dozer on the ground into a vernal pool preserve? Chief Jenkins, you probably have some
Dealt
insight
with
on
that a
that.
lot after the fact. But one of the things I do like is the vernal pools, the conservancies love fire. They would prefer if we just burned them off or squared them off. So part of that is identifying those areas prior to, knowing that, hey, let's use indirect. Let's look at burning out or firing or squaring off, as we say, these vernal pool areas when conditions are favorable, and take care of the conservancies at the same time, the natural habitat and vernal pools. But we need to be very, very sensitive of the environmental concerns. Over by the dump, which is actually off of Kiefer and Grant Line, is in the SRA. It is also surrounding the dump is a conservancy. So you put a dozer right down that, I guarantee it, we're going to be dealing with that for weeks, if not months after the fact. The fire we referred back to on Florin, they were very, very happy. They knew we had to put a dozer line down, but they were very happy. And the letter I got back from them was, it was obvious that the dozer avoided the vernal pools. And they were, that can't go any better, right? They love it. They actually wish that we had taken more real estate with fire on that one there, out of control fire, and it was spot, and we needed to put that one out. But it is a balancing act. If you do see the signs that say conservancy or vernal pool, we need to avoid the vernal pools. Not to say we can't put a dozer line down, avoid the vernal pools, but it's a great opportunity to say, hey, you know what? Let's get ahead of this down the road. Maybe put a dozer line up ahead of it, square it off like we talked about, and let's burn out the top into that piece in the corners and then let this whole thing burn. Don't use any water is a tactic, or, the tactic we can use to fight that fire. But an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure of having to deal with the environmental issues after the fact.
So from the station
Yes.
level, looking at that picture that we had up, when Chief Jenkins talked about, let's go get it, what are some of your options to go in and getting that? Are we going to be able to split the head of that fire? Are we going to be able, so what are some of the thoughts out there at the station level on what it means to go and get that fire?
I think Joe has
25
someone.
is saying that, it is far away, but based on these flame lengths, maybe direct attack isn't the best mode of attack. I have another comment, and it came in a little bit ago, and I didn't get it out fast enough, but they want to know what's out in front of the fire. Is there livestock? Are there buildings? Obviously, no immediate threat in the picture, but they would initiate a mobile attack if possible.
So think about that too. Good point on the livestock is if we open gates, do we close gates behind us? You do have, it looks like a dirt road right on the side of that, other side of that fence. Is that an access point that you can get up and around and drive directly to it instead of booty crashing across the green? Is that, and again, if you get caught in the green out there and you get stuck, that could be a problem with the flank of the fire coming at you.
So any thoughts on how to go get that fire? If we were going to go direct on it?
Helicopter. Tanker 134.
Mobile attack or no?
I think you could mobile attack that.
Yeah,
It's going to depend what the conditions are at the head when you get there. If you can knock it down, take the heat out enough of it, or is it moving too fast you can't even catch up to it?
and that's the big question. I think running up and splitting the head is out of the question on that fire.
Well, you're going to split the head into two heads.
Right. At that point.
Now you're going to be trying to catch both heads at that point. So when you hear the term splitting the head, that's something, it's a very aggressive tactic that is very seldom successful.
Well,
All
one
right,
of the
I have-
strategies you can use is we talk about hooking the head, right? If you're going to send somebody, if the fire is going to run on you and you can come up in the black and say, hey, I'm going to go up and hook the head. But there's another thing you have to do. I'll pose this a question to the group. If you're going to go up into the black and go up and hook the head, right? What do the other incoming resources have to do behind you?
You have to have,
I guess a question to the group out there, right?
Right.
So if you're going to have that, again, I'm going to go in, I've got a fire, and boy, this thing's going to get away from me. I'm going to get up and go up and hook the head from the left to the right side. What are the assignments for the other incoming crews to help make this plan successful?
So Joe's got some.
66 is saying they're going to drive to the heel and then drive up the center of the block to split the head.
I
65
use the word hook the head,
Yeah.
right?
65 says they would do a mobile attack with support from the copter and extra pump and rolls. And then I have 25 that wants to be heard. You need to unmute your mic on your end, station 25, and go ahead and talk to us.
Hey, Joe, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go for it.
So one of the things I was trying to bring up is whether or not we're going to be outside the hauling chart based on flame lengths, and also what's going to be in front of this fire. And if we have an opportunity to get out in front of it, perform some indirect attack, as opposed to going direct and putting our rigs and personnel in danger, we might have a better opportunity to do some indirect attack as opposed to going out in the field, risking damage to our personnel or our rigs. A firing operation, if conditions are favorable, might be a better opportunity.
So
Panelists?
all good points. So what I'm actually hearing here, and I haven't heard anybody actually use it, is I think the best answer here is a combination attack, where we're using offensive where it's appropriate and indirect defensive where it's appropriate, and together that's a combination attack and helps us contain the incident. So just something to think about. There is no wrong answer because we change our tactics based upon their success or their failure. So if we're able to go up and hook that head or split that head and bring it back and stop the forward progression on it, that's great. But if that tactic's not working, we change our tactics, right?
And the other part too is knowing how far the second company's in behind you. Where I was going to go is if you're going to go up and hook the head, you need to have other people come in and anchor and flank, right? Anchor and flank and then tie into where you are at. If crews are going to be delayed, it might not be best to hook the head. It might be best to anchor and flank and hold a one good solid line and let the head run a little bit and that other, maybe the cold flank take off. And then as companies come up, anchor and flank, or then you can start sending people out there to go hook the head or leapfrog per se. But you can't get ahead of yourself. It's a balance act that you've got to have. If you're going to do one thing, you got to make sure you cover. And I'd always revert back to, on a lot of these fires that get out of control and they run, you'll hear the IC say, guys, back to the basics, anchor and flank the fire, perimeter control. So if you get overloaded, overwhelmed, fall back to that. That'll save your bacon.
So one quick question I had for everybody out there. So you're going to use the tactic, you're going to go up to the head, you're going to split it. How many engines do you need to do that for that to be successful?
While you guys are commenting on that, I think going back, so when you talk about hooking the head or running up and splitting the head, maybe it's too hot. I can't get all the way up to try to split the head. Pop out on a shoulder. Pop out on a shoulder, work your way back towards the heel. You can always have your second in unit anchor and flank the heel and work their way towards you. I think that's a great tactic if I can't catch the head. You can also pop out on a shoulder somewhere and try to hook the head from there. Get yourself something that's not so intense, not so hot out there. So those are some options. Did we have any response to that, to Chief
No.
Russell's question?
Oh, we do now. 66 says at least 2.
Okay, good answer. So yeah, at least 2. A single engine splitting the head is going to do just that. They're going to split the head. Now you're going to have 2 heads. And now when you get 2 heads because they've split, you've got 2 fire fronts, sometimes go in 2 different directions, which now has increased our instant complexity. All right, we'll continue moving on. Next. Okay, so just some diagrams talking about our basic things. So here's first engine, flank attack, anchor and flank. I think second engine comes in, we tend to anchor and flank the opposite and work our way up. So a pincer attack, we're anchoring and flanking both flanks simultaneously, or as additional resources arrive, we're signing them to opposite flanks. And before we kind of go too much farther, I think we're at a good spot to go ahead and take a break. So we'll take our 10 minutes and then we'll come back and keep the discussion going. I appreciate everybody that's starting to provide some input. Thank you, 25, for calling in. Let's try and get some more people to kind of have that interaction with us. I think it works better when we can talk direct versus having to go through the texting and the chat function. So
Have them get some questions now.
yeah, come up with
Together now over
yeah.
10 minutes. Throw them out to Joe and Jason, and we'll answer them when we come back on.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So during the break, come back with a couple questions, throw them at us, and let's keep the discussion going. So see everybody back here in 10 minutes. Okay, welcome back. I hope everybody is coming back, has a couple questions for us. So during the break, 55 called in with a question that I think is a very good question. So we're going to go back and we're going to talk about it. So Chief Jenkins was the IC on the fire that started on Florin Road, went to Jackson Highway. The plan was to try and fire Jackson Highway, and 55's question was, at what point do you want to start firing, and where are you going to fire? At what point are you going to wait for the head to get to before you make that decision to put fire on the ground? And the plan there that unfortunately we ran out of time was we're going to initiate the firing at the intersection of Eagles Nest and Jackson Highway and try and take fire across the head to hold at Jackson Highway. Unfortunately, we ran out of time and the fire got to Jackson Highway before the crews were in place to actually put fire on the ground.
So I think that's a good point. Being out on Florin Road, and this is where the left flank, I think, was Rob Matheson, 368. He was kind of out there by himself. That was the cold flank. The hot flank was the right flank, and it was a typical south-southwest wind blowing north-northeast. And that catcher's mitt kind of per se, if we're going to take out the corner, would have been Jackson and Eagles Nest. Really reinforced the right flank. We kind of thought we might be able to catch it before it hit Jackson. So we plugged in, probably had about 4 or 5 engines. I remember Forrest Rowell came in, was the division soup, plugged the dozer in on the right flank. Helicopter was supporting that unit, and that was with kind of a moderate rate of spread, and then it took off. Chief Mitchell was Battalion 9. I plugged him in to take Division Hotel. It started off as a contingency. I got him heading towards Jackson and Grant Line with a contingency of looking, hey, I'm going to put you into play if this thing gets there. He got up there, gave great situational awareness, said, hey, this is your priority division. The fire is going to come to me. It is going to hit Jackson Highway. And so immediately I knew when we were going to fire that road, one, we needed to shut the road down. Calling for law enforcement, code 3, and also with Division Hotel to shut down the road and evacuations. That was another piece. And I started ordering and diverting engines to that location to get a firing operation in play. Well, as Grant said, the fire hit the road before they could get there. Luckily, we had engines there that could go after it. But the goal would be to take out that corner there and then bring in fire across the head. The fire would run into it and then also reinforce those flanks going back to the heel.
I think 55's question was, how early do I start the backfiring? If the decision's been made that the fire is going to reach a certain point and this is the edge of the box where we're going to hold it, I don't think you can start that burnout too early. I think if I really wanted to speed it up, I could take a bunch of heat, put it out in the middle between the main fire and my burn and my backfire, and I could speed up the process that way. So I think if it's just creeping and backing and it's something that you can hold, eventually that main fire is going to get close enough to suck your backfire into it. So I don't really think that you can start too early on that. I don't know if you guys have any other thoughts.
No, I'd agree with you, is get ahead of it, get the resources there and get going earlier so you can give yourself some depth. And when that main part of the head fire hits it, it holds. Good point.
Okay. So thanks 55 for the question. Any of the other stations have any questions for us that they came up with at the break that they want us to address?
All right, let me look. I think you've addressed them to this point.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and kind of continue on. Some of this stuff is hopefully repetitive as we talk about stuff that we should be covering in our RT-130, S-190 recurrent training as we head into the wildland season. So we'll just talk about parallel attack. What is a parallel attack? Ed, fill us in.
Parallel attack, offensive tactic used when flame is too intense or the fire's edge is irregular or long. Works well with dozer and engine or 2 engines working in tandem. The control line existing or constructed 30 to 100 from the fire's edge, burnout as the line continues to progress. So I guess this is, I mean, from my interpretation, it's
It's an indirect tactic.
it's an indirect tactic, but it's not extremely indirect. I mean, you're, like you said, 30 to 100 feet off the side. And I think this is the perfect opportunity for that burnout operation that we're talking about, just to make sure that you're holding what you have behind it. And we all know how quickly the wind can change around here. So if you are working in parallel, strongly consider burning out behind you.
So if you look at the diagram we have up here, so essentially what the dozer is doing, instead of the dozer going direct and paralleling the fire's edge, the dozer is connecting the dots. So the dozer is going to be a lot faster by just going as straight as they can, get as close to the fire as they can when the opportunity arises. So that dozer is going to go try and wrap that finger that's coming out on the right side back into the main fire, with the engine coming up behind it and just burning that little piece out between the dots. So that your starting and end point are the dots that the dozer's doing on the as they punch in that dozer line. If that makes sense to everybody, I think that's the easiest way to explain that. So if you have a fire that's really fingering out, instead of mobile attacking those individual fingers, just tie the tips of all those fingers together and burn those pockets out. Okay, so frontal attack, it's an attack from the green. So I think Ed's hit it really pretty well. It's probably one of the most dangerous things you can do in a wildland incident, and the conditions are going to affect whether or not this is a successful or even a viable tactic. So if you have greater than 8 or 11 foot flame lengths, a frontal attack, you're going to be taking a lot of heat, a lot of smoke, and a very little probability of success. It's something you're going to want to have lots of resources. You need to make sure that you have your safety zones and escape routes identified, because if you lock in and you don't have a way out while making a frontal attack, you have just put yourself in a really, really bad spot. So we talked about 10 o'clock or 2 o'clock example, and additional units coming on the flanks. I think we've kind of talked a little bit about this, but I think if we go to the next slide, it'll be more of a visual. So here's a perfect example that Ed talked about earlier about coming in on that shoulder, or in this case, what's being referred to as the 10 o'clock position. Ed?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously you're gonna run up until heat and smoke prevent you from going any further to try to catch that head. And at that point, turn left or right, depending on which flank you're on, pop out on his shoulder. If you think you can hook the head from there, that might be a tactic. If nothing else, you can work your way back towards the heel of the fire, and with another resource working from the heel towards you.
Okay, the 2-engine frontal attack, often referred to as splitting the head. And this is going to be entirely condition dependent. So if you have a fire that's actually really moving out, and you have to think about, how long does it take you to drive up to get the 2 engines in position? And then once you're in position to get your nozzle person on the ground, nozzle deployed, nozzle charged, and going again, by the time that's done, are you still in a position to implement that tack, or do you have to catch back up to that head to make that an effective tactic? So that's just something to think about when you decide to try and implement that tactic on a fast-moving vegetation fire.
I think it's important to mention too, if we're going to try a tactic like this for the captain, get out and walk with your fireman up front, figure out what kind of heat he's taking, how much smoke he's eating, what the conditions are like outside the rig. I haven't seen anybody just sit in the rig, so I haven't seen that, but just keep that in mind that, no different than when we're in a structure fire and I'm behind my firefighter, I'm not feeling the full effects of the heat that he's feeling, so.
And then tandem attack, just involves 2 engines. First engine's just pretty much moving up, quickly knocking down the heat, trying to get to the head. The second engine's just securing that line behind the first engine. I think this is something that we do almost daily around here once fire season's in full swing. That second engine's securing that line, making sure we don't get any slop over along the line, and we have a good wet line down. And that's probably what the most crucial piece right there is, getting that solid wet line down so we don't get those little fingers skunking out and then outflanking. And like Chief Jenkins said, losing real estate we've already paid for.
And I think if you guys are using a tactic like that and the first engine is putting down a great wet line and nothing's popping out behind them, consider a leapfrog tactic where, hey, I'll go up 100 yards in front of you and start there. And then when you catch me, then we'll just leapfrog all the way to the head.
Okay, so back to some of our scenarios. I'd like to hear some more stations call in and get their input. So you're the first arriving engine on this fire. So just for your, to put it in perspective, this is a fire out towards Battalion 5 off of Baseline Road, 117, 111. And you're first arriving on this. What are your conditions? What are you seeing? And what are your priorities? Okay.
Pretty long. That's a lot.
Looks like it's kind of long and narrow.
Fire.
Okay. Do we potentially have some access issues? What's our fuel bed? And I know, again,
Power
it's a
lines.
2-dimensional picture. What caused this fire? All things to think about. What resources? What's your lag time for additional resources? So beyond that first alarm, where's your additional resource requests coming from? Okay, I'm just going to ask a simple question. When you order additional resources at Metro Fire, do we have a second alarm grass assignment?
We do not.
Okay, correct. We do not. And if you were to order a second alarm of grass assignment, more than likely, you're just going to get a repeat of the first alarm. But beyond that, order the type and kind. So with that said, order pump and roll capability. Don't order type 3s. Because if you order type 3s, you could have type 5s that are pump and roll, type 5 engines, and they're going to get bypassed in the dispatching process. So you could be waiting for type 3s to come from B14 to a fire in B5 because you ordered type 3s. So order pump and roll capable engines. Don't order type. And additionally, don't order the 5 closest any type, because as soon as you do that, dispatch is going to send you 5 type 1 engines, because that's just how the CAD is programmed. So if you order any type of closest resource, you're going to get 5 of the closest type 1 engines and nothing else. Chief Jenkins, you want to talk about ordering structure resources for a vegetation fire?
Yeah, so what we want to do is kind of the same adage, order what you need. A lot of times when we have a vegetation fire, we typically have a structure threat, and usually an exterior fire where pump and rolls are going to be more bang for your buck. They can do perimeter control. They can also put the fire out. But what happens is, let's say I've got an involved structure on a veg fire and I truly need a structure response. You should come back and request a BC, 4 engines, 2 trucks, and a medic unit to respond on your incident. That keeps them on your TAC unless you decide to get a command channel and additional TAC channels. It keeps you on their incident. So one of the challenges would be, let's say you're working, let's say B14 is working a veg fire and he has a structure involved, and he says, give me a structure response, and dispatch, he's on incident number 1 and he dispatches incident number 2, and B9 gets dispatched, and B9's going, oh, I'm going to a structure fire. They're going to hop in all their equipment. They're going to be heading to think they're going to a structure fire, and they may or may not put in the 2 and 2 that the veg fire is the cause of it, and that they need to communicate as one incident to bring this incident into fruition. The only challenge with that is I had a fire. I was heading up Folsom Boulevard, and the fire was across Highway 50 into some bushes, and we had a structure threat over into Gold River area. And so when I asked for those resources, it's going to pull the closest resources by the mine shaft, when actually I need them on the Gold River side, which 32 and 60, well, 63 was on the call I was on, but 32 and 65 and 31 would be the closest units. But if I called them from this side, I was getting Folsom units and 66, and really would not have been effective. So in that sense, dispatch, plugging it in Gold River would have been that exception to do it. But I would say ask for what you need, call them in. And again, remember, your pump and rolls can put the structure, but the reality check is, in our department, when people are responding in their wildland engines, they're not bringing their turnouts with them. So if you specifically need type 1s, ask for type 1s, ask for the trucks, and fill that order that way, and keep them under your umbrella of IC and incident command.
I think certain areas, a structure response might be warranted. Like there's a section in 42's area right along Roseville Road, where if you had a significant structure threat in there, you could get some type 1 engines in there, and they can actually string some hose down between houses and put out stuff in the backyard or help you out. And we have those type of areas all over the district. So where the type 3s and the type 5s can actually concentrate on putting the fire out, those type 1s are there just in case you.
Absolutely. And that would be a good example. If you just needed, if you had a structure, a fire rapidly moving towards structures, you might just specifically ask for a BC and 5 engines and not have trucks, because you don't have the involvement. You have some involvement going on, maybe get a couple of truck companies coming, but just be aware when you order the structure response, they might dispatch it as incident number 2 and not be part of your incident. And that's what we have to kind of remember, managing that bigger incident is keeping them together in most cases.
Chief, would you recommend a separate TAC channel just on the same incident for that, or? I know it's
That
situation
depends.
dependent, but-
And so we always want to make sure that the incident drives our decision process. So typically when we add a command channel or we add a TAC channel, we're adding complexity. If we don't need to get more complex, then don't. But also remember, you've got to have the players on scene before you implement these other channels. So it's good to have a plan, get a command channel, 2 additional TACs, whatever you're going to do. Then your divisions can manage, have a command channel to work from. But if you don't have the resources on scene, don't implement the plan. You can have the channels there and not utilize them, but you got to have the people in play. So let the incident dictate. If we can have radio discipline and we don't need to, it's better to stay on one channel. So to mirror in most of our expanded incidents, I'll throw in some CAL FIRE stuff. It's usually 3 channels that we work from. A command channel, which could be Camino, a TAC channel, which could be CDF TAC 2, and then air to ground. So we should be able to fight most of our fires in this arena with 3 channels, and those are they. The challenges we have in B14 is now we got to throw in our command channel, Alpha 2, and our TAC, A7. So now you got 5 channels that B14 is having to navigate here. And what we like to do when we can is take A2 and A7 and kind of put it to the side and work off the CAL FIRE banks. So when we bring that complexity of a command and attack, with the CAL FIRE incidents, we're going to shy away from that. In Metro Fire's jurisdiction, we can't. Or Sac City, you'll see, will utilize that a lot. And things get a little confusing. I think it was Chief Keeley the other day. They got dispatched, I want to say, on with like A6, D6, B7. There was like 3 different banks of channels that came at them, and dispatch just made that decision. So you have to be careful when things get changed or switched around our channels, because you've also got to manage them. So let the incident dictate it. But one of the things I've learned too, if radio traffic gets too complex and you don't have people there to manage a command or attack channel, what you do is you get on the radio, and I learned this from Chief Van Brunt back in the day, is he sat there and says, all incoming units stay off the radio, report to staging, face-to-face comms with the IC. And boy, radio traffic just dies right out. And sometimes you have to do that. The challenge is on a big fire is you have people coming in from all over the county, they see fire, they want to jump on it. And some of that discipline at that point is they've got to come to staging and stay off the radio if it gets to that complex, just to maintain it. Division Soup can always see an engine driving by and saying, hey, you're mine, come to me, and then hit the IC. I've grabbed engine 355, they're assigned to Division Lima, and you can do that. But complexity, just remember, try to keep it. If it dictates it, use it. If not, don't use it.
Okay, so we're going to kind of shift gears a little bit here, talk about decision-making and applying a risk management process at the incident level. So this slide right here is from the U.S. Forest Service for applying the risk management process. So if you look at this and see what this actually entails, it should look very similar to something everybody here should be familiar with. So the first step in this process is situational awareness, gain situational awareness. And it's a wheel, so it's cyclical, so it never ends until the incident ends. So then we gain our situational awareness, we then make an assessment of our situation. Okay, then we identify, based upon our assessment, what our risk controls are going to be. So how can we mitigate identified risks? We come to a decision point, we make our decision, we implement, we evaluate, and then we start the whole process as things change. What does this look like or sound like here at Metro Fire? Okay. This is our command philosophy. It's pretty much a little bit different format, but it looks very, very similar. And everybody here should be used to our command philosophy. So what do? We gain situational awareness. We determine our incident complexity. We perform our risk assessment. We establish our decision points. And then we establish management and control objectives. We make our IAP. So when everybody hears the term IAP, you think of the formal IAP you get on a large scale incident. But the reality is we establish an incident action plan on every call we go on. We identify what needs to be done and how we're going to do that, and we mitigate and control the incident and terminate the incident. So even every medical aid has some sort of an incident action plan. We arrive on scene, we assess the patient, we determine the treatment for the patient, we determine a destination, and we transport the patient. That's an incident action plan. And then we build our organization to support our objectives. Ensure we have the appropriate resources, ensure they're assigned appropriately, and then we reevaluate and we start the process all over again. So next slide. Okay, so this is, I think this is Chief Jenkins' little cheat card for your first on scene, taking command of an incident. So just some things to think of, first thing you do, name the incident. What's the location of your ICP? Are you going to be stationary or mobile if you're the first or second in company officer? What's our incident priority? Are we live, incident stabilization, property conservation? What's our strategy? Offensive, defensive combination? And then if you want to reference Chief Jenkins' presentation from last year's PDP, Captain Aldrich from training will have those available to everybody. But organize your incident, box it. What are your incident boundaries? Where do you want to keep the incident? What are your operational areas? So divisions and groups. What work needs to be done in those, and what resources do you need in each operational area?
I think a great point, though, Grant, you bring up there. When we talk about an incident action plan, I remember doing a IA towards I guess Lake Berryessa. And I remember pulling up with a crew, a strike team of engines, and I went and met with the incident commander. And, we were so used to going there and having a IAP handed to you, right? And I remember him looking at me and he says, hey, pull out a piece of paper because we're building the IAP right now. And it was literally, I'm giving you this division. Here's these strike teams assigned to it. And you've got from here to here and you're going. That's how the IAP started. So when we go back to that little question, we have the 4 parts and stuff that we see. Some questions could be just when we talk about boxing it could be just having a piece of paper and saying, here's my box. And when you guys look at some of these fires and the questions come at you and you saw the long fire from the heel all the way ahead and go, holy, where am I going to start with this, right? It might be as simple as just keep the fire on that side of the road, right? If you could just come up and just build my boxes, I want to keep it within here, but let's not let it jump this road. Let's keep it there. That's a good start, just to be able to start where we're coming. And then it might be left flank and a right flank or a division alpha or Yankee. That's the other part we get into op areas. But again, you want to keep it simple, but a lot of it, your incident action plan can be verbal. It could be writing it down on a piece of paper. It could be grabbing part of my division and who's assigned to me. The IC is Battalion 9, and guess what? He's got the left flank is given to 311, and Captain Henderson's going to run that. Get over there, get your eyes on it, tell me what you need. And that could be just on a piece of paper, keeping it simple. But remember, when you're a little bit overwhelmed, just go back to the basics. And a lot of times we just do stuff instinctively. We attack the fire, we keep it on that side of the road. But if you can come in and build that plan, that's when I talk about those 4 parts of boxing it, left flank, right flank, you're op-airing it out. What work do you want them to do? I want you to anchor and flank, perimeter control, structure defense, and what resources, the most important part, what resources do I need to get that done? Keep it in mind, IAP can be pad and paper, it could be verbal. Just keep it simple as you can and get as complex as you need to be. But if you don't need to be complex, keep it simple.
So we talked about incident organization, divisions, groups, branches. What influences our decision when we decide to form divisions on an incident? What's the decision point that we start to establish divisions?
Can we be a little confrontational here? Let's throw out branches. Let's throw out what would be, use the same concept, but what would be a part of making a branch or decision making of being a branch? We don't ever really talk about that in Metro Fire's jurisdiction.
Complexity. So, branches tend to be for more complex incidents. Maybe you had a fire out in Rancho Murrieta that's headed for the main part of the community, and now you need evacuations, and so now you're bringing in a large law enforcement function. So now that would be a good decision point to establish a branch. You establish a law branch. They're going to handle evacuations. They're going to handle traffic control. They're going to, that's a good decision point for a branch, and then you're going to have the fire branch. So that would be an example of establishing functional branches. Generally, we tend to see branches established on larger incidents, and the decision point is span of control. So we start on an incident, think simple to complex. Can an incident be managed left flank, right flank with 2 to 5 engines? What is the span of control? What is optimal? And I know there's people out there getting ready to take promotional exams for captain in BC, so you should be thinking that should be a simple question that's in the back that you should just think about right away. What is optimal span of control?
I think with branches too, you're looking at where we discuss is you can't go a law, you can't go a fire branch, you can't go branch 1, branch 2. That's usually when we talk about the areas. But if you had a fire burning, let's say on one side of Jackson Highway, and it's pretty intense, you got houses going. Let's say now you have some injuries and you have a medical group. Maybe you've got Division Alpha, Division Charlie, and now it jumps Jackson Highway and it's off to the races. You might make that first part of your fire branch 1 with medical group, with Division Alpha. I said, let's say make a Division Yankee. They're going to handle that along with evacuations, all the other challenges. You might have a law branch or a law component in there. And then when it jumped Jackson, now everything on that side's branch 2. And it might be get over there branch 2 and figure out what you need and run it, because I've got this other problem going on over here. We don't use it that often, but it's just a good point when we, especially the bigger incidents we get into. And some of you have been on large incidents where they start zoning fires out, a whole nother level of incident command. Branches we don't use too often, but I thought I'd throw it out there for if it ever does pop, people have a understanding that it is part of ICS.
Well, and if we're going to have a functional branch, I think for me, it depends on how spread out everything. If I've got a larger fire, maybe 1,000-acre fire down in B14, and I've got, like you said, I'm going to establish a medical group because I've got some injuries, some burn injuries. Do I have one way at the north end, way at the south end? Is it worth assigning a medical group to a division? Do I have enough going on in that division to assign that? Or can I take that and just kind of move them around the fire?
Mm-hmm.
So,
or even firing groups, a great example. You can have a firing group that just moves from division to division, and they're in charge of all firing. But as they go, they just pass the torches around. But as they move from division to division,
So to get back to the answer to the question, based upon span of control, optimal is 5 to 7. So if you're the initial IC, and once you get to that point where you're reaching that 5 to 7 mark and you're ordering additional resources to go beyond that, that should be your decision point to start establishing your divisions and groups and to start planning ahead. Start thinking ahead. Don't think about what you need right now. Think about 20 minutes, 40 minutes, 60 minutes down the road and what you're going to need to mitigate the incident. So if you're planning to see this incident evolve, then think ahead, establishing your divisions. So something to think about when we come up into our incident structure. So now we're going to go into some more scenarios, and I'd like to hear a lot of input from the stations about what you're thinking, what you see. So first in company officer, this is what you're arriving to. What are you think? What do you see? Let's start simple. Let's go simple to complex. What's the first thing you see and jumps out at you?
Got some significant flame lengths going.
Okay. You have a well-established head. Looks like you have a continuous fuel bed.
I'm trying to figure out what's driving down there on that left side. Is that an engine? Is that a tractor? What is that?
I think that's a UTV.
And maybe the source of the fire. Maybe a farmer out there. That may be your life safety threat,
So what's our smoke column doing? Do we have a good anchor point? Is there?
Oh, you asked me.
Gotta-
Yeah, I mean, I see a pretty good anchor point. That's a pretty defined line down there by the UTV on the bottom side of that picture. That's where I would be anchoring and then working my way up the hill towards the head. Your smoke column's laying pretty much flat with the terrain, so it's a wind-driven fire at this point, depending on the flame lengths and the fire intensity. And I think with regard to that too, like my initial arrival report, if I report moderate rate of spread with structures threatened in 20 minutes, that means something very different to the BC than if I report a dangerous rate of spread with structures threatened in 20 minutes, right? There's a lot more ground in there to cover, and with resources you're going to need to be thinking about ordering.
And preloading, yeah.
And when we come up, depending on what everybody's considering this, I would consider this probably moderate to rapid rate of spread, depending on the wind on it, without being there. But yeah, there's a great anchor point down at the bottom. I would just anchor right off. I don't know what's down there, if that's a road where that UTV's at, or if it's a canal, or what it is.
It looks
55
like
degrees
it's
with you.
holding, but then again, is it a continuous field bed? Is it just mashed down grass? It is a road? What is it? Who knows? But yeah, it looks like a good point to start. But look at the flame links there on the front end. Are you going to go direct on that? I mean,
Absolutely not.
that's pretty, now you could come up on the flanks and slowly start taking it. Copter could cool it down for you.
Sure.
You could get a dozer line way out in front of this thing, indirect, and then fire off the dozer line in front of the main body of fire, or pick a road out in front of it.
And if
Or they're gonna hold it.
you're ready, I mean, these fires tend to, you'll have rapid rate of spread, and then all of a sudden the wind will die down for a couple of minutes, and then it'll go to moderate. And so you just kind of follow along with it, bump along the flank, and
And I think that's a very good point to bring up is Mother Nature is going to dictate what you can and cannot do. So just wait till it turns favorable in the conditions and then go after it.
Yep.
And the Jackson fire, I think, burned for 12 hours until Mother Nature kind of turned the wind down a little bit. And then we were able to finally put it out.
right.
So what happens to a fire like this when it hits a ridge top? Does the fire intensity increase, or what happens when it hits that ridge top? Do they tend to slow down? Are the lee-sided ridges good places to stop forward progression on some of these fires?
55 says it will die down.
Okay.
It's awesome.
Where do they, you got on these large incidents, where are they putting the dozer lines?
Oh, yeah.
Putting them on the top and the lee-sided ridges, because that's just a good place to try and hold the fire. So, okay, we'll go keep this moving along since we're,
Well, one of the things to talk about ridges too, when you talk about a slope going up, not only will fire travel up slope, but that's also the convection layer of the heated gases going up, and they're going to continue to rise. And that backward side is also a point of refuge. If you are up there on top of a ridge and you can get up to that back side, you bought yourself some time. Then it turns from a running fire into a backing fire.
okay, we'll go back to that next slide. So this is always a good one. And hopefully there's some
That
people
doesn't
out here
happen.
that have
doesn't
seen
happen.
this. This might have been a scenario at the Captain's Academy. So this is just a good one to discuss. So you're dispatched to a vehicle accident, and this is what you arrived to. So what are you thinking? Okay, what are your priorities right now?
Yeah, your priority is life, and if you're responding to a vehicle accident, you're probably not planning on there being a grass fire as well.
Okay,
You
so
may anticipate that these power lines could be an issue.
so what's the response going to a vehicle accident with rollover? BC, an engine, a truck, and a medic usually, right? So something to think about. You're a little bit behind the power curve. What are your priorities when you get there? You know, the
55
first thing,
says our priorities are the victims of the vehicle accident.
Let's also throw up too the question I threw in there: what resources do you need to bring this incident to mitigate this incident? If you're talking, you're on a vehicle accident, what additional resources are you going to need? And I'm not talking just fire resources. What do you need that needs to be handled?
Law enforcement, traffic control.
okay, so complex incident behind the power curve. So how do you set this up? What's your ICS structure upon arrival, do you create a separate incident or do you keep this as a single incident?
Do you go after the grass fire? Do you leave the
Depends.
person, do you pitch the vehicle accident and the injuries?
No.
Is it a life priority?
My priority.
It's a life.
Now, if the situation were a little bit different and there were no victims, it was just a vehicle fire that had spread to the wild end, obviously I'm going after the wild end because
Would it change if somebody's still in that vehicle right now upside down?
absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, now we're in life priority. The grass fire can burn for days as far as I'm concerned. You know, obviously get some resources in there to take care of it, but my priority is the people upside down in that car.
So I think that's the big thing is you talked about you arrive on scene, you're handling the life safety is the priority. But then also too, you can, as a first due company officer, look at the bigger picture and say, what do I need to handle that? And it might be as simple as a grass response. It could be, hey, obviously you've got a lot of acreage there that's burned. You might be overwhelmed just dealing with the vehicle and a medic and the extrication piece and the power lines. I remember the old scene safety. You may need to just focus on that, but you can also plant the seed with the BC, or if a BC is not coming, get one rolling and maybe ask for another BC 5 engines, water tender, dozer copter to handle that.
Well,
Right.
my question is, as a first arriving company officer, do you feel comfortable letting your crew handle the vehicle accident while you go get some SA and figure out
Correct.
what resources you're going to need? Do you feel comfortable letting them stay on the side of the road and do their thing while you're trying to manage that incident as an
Well, the other part on that one there is the access to that grass fire too with the power lines, right? So yeah, you got there's a lot going on there.
So how do you set that up in your ICS structure? Do you go with a medical group and division out the grass fire? Do you establish a medical branch? Do you in a vegetation grass fire branch? How do you set that up?
And how would you run it?
Do you put
And
the
then you look at it as a BC. You come in as a BC and, you know, are they managing the vehicle accident with extrication fine with just single unit identifiers? Do you need to focus on that and then get another BC to come in and handle your veg fire? Do you make the veg fire another division?
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of ways to skin that cat there, but I would probably make the vehicle accident its own separate division, get the resources I need in there, and then make the grass fire initially a separate division.
So let's talk about, what would you call it? What would you call the division on that one, Ed, if you did that?
I would call the vehicle accident, report the vehicle accident. It's easily identifiable.
Sure.
That's Division Alpha. Grass fire would be Division Bravo. Now, if the situation evolves and this grass fire gets big, then we can always continue to division it out.
So if you
Keep
were
it
to
at the
come
fire,
in, let's
is
say
that-
you called that alpha there, looking at the work, right? We're going to go into our 215.
Sure.
If I was going to give you the vehicle accident, the power lines and the fire in the general area, what work do I need to have done there, right?
Correct.
We got to secure the power.
Yep.
We've got to put the fire out. We've got to extricate let's say there's 2 people, we got to triage, transport and them. So what do we need? What resources we need just for that right there?
Well, if you say I have 2 people, I need obviously 2 medics, truck, engine company to take care of Division Alpha.
Mhm.
And then I'm going to need Type 3s, dozer, helicopter, whatever I need to take
For the
care
other
of
division,
for
right?
My Division Bravo,
Yeah.
which is the grass fire.
And the Division Alpha, you might want to throw SMUD in there or PG&E that they can assist with the power line issue, you know, and handle. And sometimes you might need to just protect in place until that power is secured.
And
Right.
the other thing too for me is calling it a vehicle accident division Alpha. That's the heel of the fire as well. So at that point, once I mitigate the life safety hazard, then it just becomes a part of the fire division Alpha.
So you're coming in as a BC. Can a captain run that?
I think a captain can most definitely run. I mean, yes. As
Could
a
a
captain, you
absolutely. And can a captain run the veg fire for you if
Sure.
you're a BC and that's your priority and you're focusing on that?
absolutely.
Absolutely. So you could sit there and take a captain and just say, hey, I'm going to give you, in this case, Division Bravo. That is the vegetation fire. Get over there, get your eyes on it. Tell me what resources you need. Or, hey, you're now the Division Soup. You're Division Bravo. Here is engine. Here's the dozer. Here's the cop. They work for you. And I'll get you another BC. And when he gets there, I'll relieve you if that needs to be. But absolutely, you can. And from an IC standpoint, that's part of that span of control is get it off your plate. Build that structure of that plan so you can manage it. And not only you got this accident, you got the veg fire. You got to be ready for the IWI or something else that's going to happen, in that incident that you can manage. So make sure you do use span of control and focus on that.
So, and here's a question for you, Chief. Would there be anything wrong with running that as two separate incidents? Start me a new incident for a grass fire.
So the challenge with that too is it is one incident, right? So yes, you need to order the resources you need. That's what we want to focus on. And the reason being is from an incident command structure, you are the IC, that is your incident. Now we did talk about this is let's say you look off in the distance, way out in the distance, you see another column of smoke coming up. It may be from the Embercast or not, but you really don't want to deal with it in our general area. And maybe, depending on where we're at, we have to deal with it. Make it part of your incident, send an engine out there and just make that a separate division. But you can say, hey, dispatch, I can't get eyes on it, resources, dispatch a whole nother assignment to that. Because this is the car, vehicle accident, wires down, fire, that is one incident. And you need to manage it as such. Now, if you make the mistake and say start a grass assignment or whatever, and they dispatch to, we'll deal with that.
Yeah.
But we want to make sure command and control that the IC is the one in charge, the one point of contact running the grass fire, the vehicle accident, and not only that, investigate everything that goes together. It is controlled together, investigations, responsibility, everything else.
It's good for expectations.
All right.
Okay, good discussion.
Yeah, thank you everybody for being here and for the guys the engine companies who participated and those who just sat and listened. Hopefully everybody learned something. I know it's always a good refresher for me to be involved in these kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Chief Jenkins and Ed, for participating and helping us out. We're going to go ahead and close this out. So like I said earlier, the PDPs from last year went over radio communications and how to establish your box or build your incident will be, Joe Aldrich will send those out from training so that you have this coming year. And just start to get in the mindset. Now is the time of year to go find your fire shelter, clean your canteens or your camelbacks, and change the laces on your boots. Instead of the first time that you're dispatched to a grass fire, you're trying to find your fire shelter, find your grass gear, and you must boot lace on your way out the door. That's not the time you want to be trying to get all your stuff together. So now's the time to get together, to get in the mindset of what this fire season is going to look like. Without joke, it's going to be the worst fire season ever. Unfortunately, over the last couple years, that has been true and has continued. Just when you think it can't get any worse, it does. And unfortunately, we're headed into another drought. The fuel conditions and everything are setting us up for the potential to be another bad fire season. So take the time now to knock the cobwebs out, make sure all your gear's taken care of, and that you're ready to respond when the first call comes in. And other than that, thank you very much for your participation and for taking time. And Chief Jenkins, we'll let you close it out.
No, I think the same thing. It's better to get prepared. The old adage is if you don't know it before the call, you're not going to quote learn it on the call. And I'm going to talk about your radios, your VHF radios. You mentioned being prepared. It's changing the batteries in the BKs also. I have had as a BC middle of July, a captain get on the radio and I can't find my BKs. I can't find my BKs as he's driving to the call in the SRA. That's not the time to pose that question, right? Especially 2 in the afternoon. It's also not time to pose the question, how do I get to CDF TAC 2, CDF TAC 8, TAC 30? Print those templates up that are coming from Steve Jordan and comms will come out, print up the cooperators agreement. Have the discussions in the station. Do what you're doing now, PDP. Continue the talks. Reach out to Captain Henderson and Captain Russell, myself, your other BCs. Get the dialogue, the discussion, develop a plan, put in the ICS, challenge the system before the call, go out and run the call, come back, have an AAR, talk about it, and then keep pushing everything forward. So thanks for everybody participating. Keep learning and appreciate everybody being involved.